Good morning, members. When the House suspended last night, we were up to the second reading, responding to abuse and care legislation amendment bill. We are up to call number 9, National Party call. Paulo Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to rise and speak to the response to abuse in care legislation amendment bill. Madam Speaker, for someone who does not have lived experience, one can only imagine the great difficulty and the horror of having to relive and give testimony to the abuse and neglect suffered. Some quite a while ago, some not so long ago. And so I want to begin by actually commending and praising the bravery of the nearly 2,400 victims of abuse who had come forward to give testimony to the Royal Commission. In addition to that, and once again, have to relive and redocument their sufferings through their submissions to the Select Committee. It is, for myself, totally unimaginable because I do see a lot of suffering and anxiety in other things, but not this myself. Madam Speaker, the bill demonstrates the government's commitment to change, true legislative change that will mean that hopefully there will be no further similar situations going into the future. The bill aims to better protect people, especially children, in the care of the state. I also acknowledge all the members who have contributed yesterday, last night, and who will contribute today, and commend their determination to bring voice to the many into this House. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Madam Speaker.
Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Madam Speaker. This legislation, we need to remind ourselves of the survivors and put them front and centre, those who have gone before and sadly no longer are with us, and those who are still with us and who have participated in this process, but also those who didn't because it was too raw, too hard, or life just meant they couldn't. And Madam Speaker, 3 weeks ago, I buried a friend of mine. Her name was Susan. And Susan was a survivor of state care. And as I look at this legislation, and as I listen to the debate again today that we've had from last year, from Select Committee to now, I can't help but reflect on the life that Susan had. And what must happen so that what happened to Susan doesn't happen to anybody else. And we've heard people say we don't want this to happen again. We want to make sure that this is something in the past and we're washing our hands of it and moving forward. But as we deal with this legislation, we need to be aware. We need to be vigilant, the fact that abuse still exists and still happens. So if you think this is the past, that we're talking about something that's happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, yes it did, and we've got better, but we haven't got there yet, Madam Speaker, in terms of ensuring that there is no more abuse of the state, of the church, of those who, through no fault of their own, end up in the system. And I look at this legislation, and I look at what was done in the past, and for me, as I read it, I look at it, it was very much about making it easy for us, making the system easy for the state, making the system easy that we can just pop people away somewhere, wash our hands and know that we've done our bit. They're fed, they're watered, they're clothed, they're housed, but it goes far deeper than that. And when we look at this piece of legislation, yes, we're going to support it, we must support it, but it does not go far enough to ensure that the state, that is the caregiver, that is the parent of a child or of someone in a mental health or for other reasons, that they are cared for in a way that means abuse doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, we aren't there yet. We look at the recommendations of the Royal Commission. We look at them and we see those 200 recommendations that sit there, and they're challenging for us as politicians. They're challenging for us as lawmakers. They're challenging for us as people who hold the purse strings, because it will cost us. It will cost this House to do the right thing. And Madam Speaker, we need to do the right thing and find a way through where we don't just sign up to 19 of those recommendations. We actually look, we search deep within our hearts and our souls and find a way to do what is right for those who are survivors of state and faith-based care, and for those who are currently in the system, that we need to ensure that this does not happen, because it reflects on us, on our nation, and on the kind of people that we are. Madam Speaker, I reflect on the life of Susan, and she went to Wellington, went to Victoria University, and she graduated when she was 22. She graduated when she was 22, and she was doing okay. Life wasn't easy. She had a history within her whānau of schizophrenia, and sadly, as she matured and her brain developed, schizophrenia became her lifetime companion, which no one wants. And what did we do? We popped her into Aotearoa Hospital for 25 years. We put her in to a hospital. We left her there, and we let her be, met her daily needs. But I don't think we actually met. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we didn't get beyond the shelter, the food and water. That's as far as we went. And that is abuse, and it must happen again. And sadly, when I did her funeral a few weeks ago, I discovered as we got the death certificate that her mother died in Aotearoa Hospital. Another survivor, or she didn't survive, of the state. We must do better. We must get this legislation right to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Dan Bigwa.
Madam Speaker, we are here this morning discussing the second reading of the response to abuse and state care legislation amendment bill. And this bill follows an apology from the Crown, which follows the Royal Commission of Inquiry into abuse of state care in faith-based institutions. This bill enacts the changes that arise from the Royal Commission of Inquiry. It is a start, it is a good first step. I'd like to acknowledge all the previous speakers from across this Parliament who have shed light and continue to shed light on the stories throughout New Zealand of the tens and hundreds of thousands of those who have been impacted and continue to be impacted by abuse and state care. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister, Erica Stanford, for taking on this work amidst her other important ministerial portfolios. I'd like to keep this contribution short. I commend this bill to the House.
Madam Speaker.
Helen White.
Thank you. This is a bill which Labor is supporting, and as it should, any step forward that tries to protect children from further abuse when we know that the consequences have been so heavy, and there has been such a good faith, thorough look at what has gone wrong. But it's been made very clear by the Labour Party that we're really concerned at the timidity of this piece of legislation, that it's just simply not going far enough. I think there are 19 recommendations out of the 200 that have been adopted by the government. Now, I appreciate that this is a piece of legislation that is looking forward to stop some of the really crass things that have happened that have really caused harm. One is strip searches, for example. There is an attempt to be more nuanced in that approach. I was appalled to find the first part of the bill was looking at extending to the existing workforce restrictions on core children's workers with convictions from overseas offences that were equivalent to some of the most heinous offences against children. Isn't it incredible that we were living in a situation where it was possible for somebody with those convictions to be working with children in this country? It does show a degree of neglect which is pretty incredible that we were in that situation at all. And so it is very important legislation. I don't mean to disregard it. But I also think it's really important that the government listen to the amendments that are going to be made by my friend Willow Jean Prime, the Honourable Willow Jean Prime, whose primary portfolio for the Labour Party is this welfare of children. And they will be made in absolute good faith. She won't be putting up things for the sake of opposition. She'll be putting up things that should deserve a cross-party good faith look at. Because that's what really is important about the work that we do in this House. It's what's going to stick. It's what's going to work for children in this country to stop abuse. It couldn't be a more critical issue to look at all the contributions in this House and get this as right as possible. It doesn't mean we will get it entirely right. Some of these are really hard problems, and it's hard to solve them. And what do you do? I think we had the comment from the Green Party earlier, where there was a talk about the strip searching and when people are coming into the places where children are being cared for. What do you do when people come in terms of searching them, etc., in order to preserve dignity, in order to make sure that people visit when their children are alienated from them in that way? How do you balance those things? So those are tough questions, but that's why we absolutely need to solve them. And the public want us to solve them by cross-party work in areas like this. Now, I also would like to take the point that my friend Glenn Bennett made. This is an area where the cost is huge, and the cost of redress is huge, and we cannot afford to just simply kick down the road the can on the worst possible things that have happened in this country. We had children tortured. And we have had devastating consequences. We talk about gangs, we talk about methamphetamine use, and we talk about imprisonment. And it's the very same kids who end up mostly in that system. And we have not addressed the critical recommendations in this report. So yes, there are 200 recommendations, but there were also some where the survivors of this were actually most forceful in what they thought. One of them was the independence of the group that was going to look at redress, etc. There was a request for independence, and we haven't met that yet. In fact, it's been decided not to do that because it's too expensive. I mean, I don't think that we could think of something that is more important than the people who are impacted by this kind of terrible abuse by the state and faith-based organisations, than their trust in the system that we create. They have to believe in it. It is so important. We have a problem out in our community with disengagement from the state, from this process in this house. People feeling utterly alienated from this house. So I think it's really important that we spend not only the money, but the political capital putting in place systems which are a bridge to people who have been completely alienated because they have absolutely every reason to distrust both the state and the religious organisations, which, let's face it, they are supposed to be the organisations that talk to the soul. They are supposed to look after the spiritual well-being of people, and they have breached that trust. We have examples across the world of this kind of problem occurring. We are not alone. We have countries like Australia and Canada, where our Indigenous populations in these countries have been particularly severely impacted. And it is worrying that in many of those countries, we have the same problem of disconnection, and actually, despite these inquiries, which I believe are absolutely in good faith, where we hear the stories of people, despite the fact that we have volumes of terrible stories, we still have not reacted across the globe in a way that means that people are accountable for their crimes. That is a problem for me. I look at Canada and I look at what has happened there and how few of the priests involved in the abuse have ever been prosecuted. I think when I was listening to something, Madam Speaker, recently on this, and it was a description of what had happened. The closing of the files, the private settlements of these matters was happening, and in fact, none of those priests had been prosecuted in the criminal system whatsoever. None. That's an institutional problem. That's a will problem. We need not only to listen to these stories, to record these stories, but when people tell us these stories, when they tell our Royal Commission these stories which are devastating, they entrust us to actually follow through. So while I see this law as a tiny step in the right direction, I don't get up here to make political hay when I say this is not good enough. And we cannot Pollyanna it. And the most important thing that we need to do is recognise that this abuse isn't just in the past. And that paying the price for the past is the first step in actually moving forward genuinely in a direction to stopping this happening anymore. And it is happening now. We know that this continues to happen. We know it has not stopped. And until we are prepared through our will in this house to work collaboratively to make sure that the right kinds of responses are in place and that there is consensus on them, and that we are paying, yes, sometimes a financial price, but also paying respectful crisis, like actually getting rid of the control of things into an independent body. Until we do that, we have got no right to expect the people who were involved in this and were hurt by this to trust us. And so we have a responsibility to follow through on the recommendations so far as that is possible and to look at this widely. And yes, it's going to be painful for us, but it's not going to be half as painful as it has been for our populations that have been hurt. So thank you. I commend this bill to the House.
Madam Speaker.
Dr. Vanessa Weenan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to be the final speaker in this debate in responding to abuse and care, the legislation amendment bill in its second reading. The report from the inquiry, the Royal Commission, was a devastating and weighty tome of horror that we worked our way through. It's a piece of work that should resonate and haunt this House for the rest of our days. The response that we're having is this is part of the response, as has been acknowledged. The apology was part of it. And what we do in this House, we're making the first step now. It's a small step. We acknowledge that this is the things that we can do that are pragmatic, that stop some of the most egregious abuses of rights. For example, the strip searches, and putting in place a way that protects people that are in care, but also allows us to make sure that dignity is upheld. Another thing that not many people have talked about in this debate is actually the record keeping, and there is a change to the Records Act, which means that there can actually be a notification and there can be some more onus put on record keeping, because for many of the survivors, and I want to acknowledge all of those who did contribute to the discussions and to the Royal Inquiry, the Commission, because I know that for everyone who did, there were thousands of others who didn't, and a few of those at least I had met in my time as a GP, and I know the impact that had on their lives, devastating throughout, and changed the trajectory of their lives. And not being able to access timely and accurate records was a frustration and a way that it appeared that their experience had been denied, another way in which they were not believed. So by strengthening and clarifying our Records Act, we will ensure in the future that records are more available and are more timely and accessible. All that we can do is to continue to improve and to protect the vulnerable, and this is a first step in us doing that, and I commend the bill to the House.
Ako Mariamino Kapakingi.
Morena, thank you. It is a duty to take the final call on this take for second reading, Madam Speaker, and Morena kia tātou. What I recognise in the speeches from last night, and in fact over the while, was the further we get away from an apology, the easier it becomes for us to, whether we recognise it or not, forget. When the apology took place in this House, many were in the gallery, and I certainly remember making a statement. The fact that we're apologising does not mean that the survivors have to forgive. And that is still very, very true today. After I read a statement being released by He Kura Mō Rehu, a group of survivors, Madam Speaker, who are deep, and this just came out this morning, reporting that they are deeply disappointed by the way in which this has been dealt with, despite the sentiments that I'm hearing this morning and last night. It does not make any sense at all when we use words like horror and small steps and egregious, and then suggest that this is enough. It makes no common sense, let alone intellectual rigour, to talk like that as if that is enough. It is absolutely not enough. I don't agree. Te Pāti Māori disagrees completely. Though we'd want to get this right. As a party, we'd want to get this right. This has to be, of any piece that we debate in this House, it has to recognise in reality and make the changes. So again, back to the survivors' report this morning, or their discussion, survivors expect change, and this doesn't cut it. Recognising that there was the apology, then there's the process of admin and payments and so on. They're looking and they're expecting something much more fundamental, and much more recognising that when we discuss it as a debate, they are not just the changes in their lives that this harm caused, but the trauma it caused, and the trauma that exists with each one of them today. The more we put aside the report, we pop it on the right of our desk, which I do not, when we keep doing that, we make distance, and then we refer back to the things that we'd much prefer to talk about, like fast track, right? And like growth and so on, which I don't think are things that are completely we should ignore either. But this matter, this is where we could do better, because this House failed. This House failed all of these survivors. And I know this, it is the work that I've been involved in. I know this very well. And I heard it being discussed last night as well, and even relating it to some of the other discussions, debates in the House, Madam Speaker, regarding domestic violence and family violence. All of that trauma, unless this House recognises what it means for individuals and their families and the generational harm, we continue to fail every single survivor that gave their story to the House and asked the House to do better. So we cannot support it. It's worse than tinkering. I don't know what another word is right now. I'll probably think of one by the time we get to the third reading. But I would implore that to the left of me, that you need to, maybe today, go back to that report, pick out some of the literature and read it, and remind ourselves of the trauma in which our families, each of those, exist today. Today, they still carry that trauma today. So Te Pāti Māori cannot and will not support this at this point, if any. When we get to third reading, he kura morihu, Madam Speaker, as well. I talked with Tu Chapman. I will be talking with her again today, but they are deeply, deeply concerned and feel completely ignored. So we need to do better. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that the amendments recommended by the Social Services and Community Committee by majority be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Responding to Abuse and Care Legislation Amendment Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. I call on Government Order of the Day number 4.
Broadcasting, Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill, second reading.
Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Scott Simpson.
Madam Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Broadcasting, Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
Madam Speaker.
Honourable Scott Simpson.
I move that the Broadcasting, Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill be now read a second time. The Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill will remove advertising restrictions from Section 81 of the Broadcasting Act 1989. Section 81, Madam Speaker, currently prohibits broadcast television advertising on Sunday and Anzac Day mornings between 6 a.m. and noon, and both television and radio broadcast advertising on Christmas Day, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Section 81, Madam Speaker, is no longer aligned with the way in which audiences consume content. And in a challenging economic environment for New Zealand media companies, it is actively hindering broadcasters' ability to earn revenue from advertising. Since Section 81 was first introduced in 1989, technology has changed significantly. And these days, fewer people engage with content through those traditional formats. Instead, New Zealanders use more on-demand and streaming services like YouTube, and they are not subject to Section 81 restrictions. In fact, New Zealand on-air data shows that in 2024, YouTube was the most popular platform in the country, reaching 44% of the population of New Zealand daily. By repealing Section 81, the bill removes this disparity between different media platforms. In doing so, it would help modernise the Broadcasting Act and allow New Zealand media companies to realise additional advertising revenue. The Economic Development, Science and Innovation Committee has finished its consideration on the bill and recommended to the House that it be passed without amendment. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to thank members of the committee for their work and diligence on this piece of legislation. During its Select Committee scrutiny, the bill received submissions from those who would financially benefit or otherwise be impacted by the repeal, including as a listener or viewer or radio and TV content provider, and those with an active interest in the media. The majority of submissions from our media broadcasters were supportive of the bill, saying that it will level the playing field for media advertising and provide a much-needed revenue injection into the sector. I'd like to take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to thank everyone who made a submission to the committee to help the committee come to its full consideration of the bill. Madam Speaker, we know that the media sector is going through a tough time and operating conditions are challenging at present. This, however, is not a challenge that is unique to New Zealand media companies. All around the world, they are facing the effects of reduced advertising revenue and are struggling to remain financially viable. This government is doing what it can to create a sustainable environment where the media can create an environment where they can continue to succeed. Part of that is having a strong, growing economy, Madam Speaker, where media companies can effectively monetise their content and give advertising companies the confidence to invest. This bill is but one of the steps we are taking to modernise media regulation and to support the sector. Recently, public consultation concluded on a suite of proposals for more extensive reform, and there will be further announcements about this soon. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Madam Speaker.
Ruben Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Where to start? Is this really what we call immediate action? So, to revisit what this bill does, this bill will repeal Section 81 of the Broadcasting Act, which restricts broadcast television advertising on Sunday and Anzac Day mornings between 6 a.m. and noon, and both television and radio broadcast advertising on Christmas Day, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. So this is about levelling the playing field, right? But really, 73 words make up this bill. 73 words. That's all the Minister has been able to give New Zealand's media sector. And yes, the bill is about fairness in the digital age. We know that advertising on digital platforms is not restricted to certain days. Online platforms can enjoy unrestricted advertising throughout the year, 24/7. So this does level the playing field for our linear media broadcasters. The government estimates of this bringing an additional $6 million per year to the media sector are completely unrealistic. We know that it will not do that. But most importantly, this is not immediate action. This is something that was already part of a suite of changes that Labour in government were going to bring through. It's the only bill the minister has gone with in the year since he became the minister and claimed that he would take immediate action for our media sector. Let's have a look at what has happened since. So on the 2nd of July 2024, Paul Goldsmith, our Broadcasting and Media Minister, released a media statement claiming that the government was taking immediate action to support the media sector. Exactly. The call is back to the bill, and the bill is the 73 words, the only immediate action the minister has taken. But while the minister is doing next to nothing, writing 73 words, here's what else has happened. On the 5th of July 2024, News Hub closed down and 200 jobs were lost. That's 200 people that don't have a job anymore. On the 7th of November 2024, TVNZ announced plans to axe 50 jobs. You can heckle all you like, but we're talking about hundreds of jobs gone in the media sector, and a minister who can, in response, only generate a 73-word repeal to an outdated Broadcasting Act that will yield very little for our media sector. On the 13th of November, and this is where it gets really interesting, RNZ reports that the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, the very piece of legislation that is set to balance the playing field, balance the ability for our local media sector to derive income from the content that they generate, is all of a sudden in limbo. And Goldsmith, at that point, our Minister Goldsmith, says that he hasn't given up on having the bill in place by the end of the year. That year being 2024. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's not 2024 anymore. On the 14th of November, NZME announced plans to close 14 regional community newspapers before Christmas, another 30 jobs lost in our media sector. I don't know if you're keeping count, but it's going up. In December, this bill, all 73 words, was introduced by the minister. On the 12th of December, following lobbying from Google and Meta, the minister announced that he was going to basically postpone our arrangements a little bit.
Same old
basically postpone our arrangements a little bit. And at that point in time, NZME's Chief Executive, Michael Boggs, says another delay to progress on the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill is disappointing. About a month later, NZME, the very organisation he heads, proposes a further reduction of 40 roles in the local media sector. 40 more people who don't have jobs. All of a sudden, on the 21st of May 2025, this government scraps their work on the digital services tax, an effective handout of $479 million per year over the next 4 years to the very tech companies that are profiting from New Zealand media content. And on the 22nd of May this year, Minister Goldsmith announces $18 million in cuts for RNZ over the next 3 years. So the local media sector not only is only getting a 73-word bill that does very little, it's also having millions of dollars cut from its budget by this government. Now, if this is really what you call immediate action, I just find it hard to believe. It's like the building's on fire and all the minister can offer is a drip. a drip, nothing more than a drip to address the fire in the media sector. People, hundreds of people losing their jobs across the last year, the promise of immediate action and nothing delivered. So on the anniversary of that bold media release promising immediate action, I sent our Minister of Broadcasting a cake celebrating immediate action. And the Minister received that cake. He takes the cake, is the word on the street in the media sector, because throughout this whole time, there has been a fair digital news bargaining bill, a piece of legislation sitting there that the Minister could have picked up and run with. But he's flip-flopped, he's weaseled around it, and he hasn't picked up that bill. Instead, painstakingly typing out the 73-word repeal that we are talking about today. Now, the Minister thanked me for the cake. The media sector has nothing to thank the Minister for, because this is it. This is the bill, 73 words, at the same time as the very platforms that profit from the local media content that the Minister is taking millions of dollars away from in funding, receive $500 million of tax relief from the same government. And the question really here has to be, what is standing in the way of the Minister doing more? Who is the Minister afraid of? Which of the coalition partners is blocking the path of more progress for our media sector at a time when it really needs it? Is it the ACT Party standing in the way? The ACT Party who celebrated the cutting of funding to RNZ? Is it New Zealand First, whose leader on RNZ, when he didn't like interview questions on Morning Report, suggested that he would cut their funding? Or is it the big tech companies that the Minister has met with, who all of a sudden are not faced with $500 million in taxes that they ought to be paying for the content that they use and for the audience that they take by using content that they're not paying for? Who is the Minister afraid of? What is stopping him from delivering more than 73 words to simply repeal a part of the Broadcasting Act? If you promise immediate action, you need to deliver it. The only immediate action we have seen is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of New Zealanders losing their job in the media sector, and a government and a minister who are not prepared to do anything about it. So whilst we support this bill, we do not support the complete inaction from the Minister. And we ask the Minister to support the media sector, because that is something so far he has proven he is unable to do.
Just before I take the next call, can I remind members to focus on what is in the bill, not what is not in the bill? I call Huhana Linden.
Tēnā koe, Madam Speaker. It is said that through this legislation, a $6 million lifeline will be thrown to local broadcasters through this new legislation to repeal all advertising restrictions on Sundays and public holidays. So let's think about that. That's all Sundays, public holidays, including Anzac Day, Christmas Day, Good Friday, Easter Sunday. Gone will be the little bit of peace and quiet that we have from the hectic modern world, which is what Gareth Hughes shared in 2015 when National last tried this. When I think about our Sundays, I enjoy my coffee with a bit of praise be and Q&A. And I think about our mokopuna who enjoy What Now or Home and Away without the noise of the Warehouse or Briscoe's or Macca's being advertised to them. But you know, many of those in the House might forget that What Now still exists. But our mokopuna still watch it despite, you know, everyone's saying, oh no, viewing trends have changed. There are still those of our mokopuna with their Nutrigrain sitting at the coffee table watching Sunday morning TV. And the Green Party have significant concerns around the exposure of tamariki mokopuna to ongoing commercial advertising. Why do we have to do that? Why on a Christmas day, when we're enjoying time with our whānau, do we have to see adverts for Instant Finance, Briscoe's, The Warehouse or My Little Pony? Because that's the thing. You're offering in this legislation a mere $6 million as a lifeline. The government is offering a mere $6 million as a supposed lifeline to the broadcasting industry when you've cut nearly $10 million from whakaata Māori, when the government has cut nearly $10 million to whakaata Māori, cut nearly, $18 million is the forecast for Radio New Zealand, and TVNZ is looking for some $30 million in additional revenue. So the $6 million projected to be now new revenue for commercial advertising on these sanctified days, our rā tapu, and our public holidays like Anzac Day, will only generate a mere $6 million. Let's not joke around and think that this is the lifeline that's needed. No, no, no. Because this government has absolutely turned its back on public broadcasting because they've favoured $2.9 billion of tax cuts to landlords instead of our public broadcasters. So let's not counterfeit and argue that somehow $6 million of commercial revenue through a bit of broadcasting on our Anzac Day is going to do anything to deal with the larger issues in terms of public broadcasting and what the government is not doing to support sustainable local public supply of broadcasting and the Fourth Estate's independence. Oh yes. Let's talk about a clear direction on that. Let's talk about protecting the Fourth Estate. Let's look at coordination and sustainable funding for public broadcasting. But no, it's only $6 million that we will see that will take away the quiet opportunity for us to watch tangata Pasifika or marae or our home and away on a Sunday, because now we're going to be filled with Briscoe's, Instant Finance, Macca's, BK and Pizza Hut, because the advertising is going to come thick and fast. And let's look at what we will be exposing our tamariki mokopuna to as well. The fundamentals of what is happening here is that it's a mere tinkering around the edges. And that's what we're seeing, is the fact that, the government is merely opening up a window for funding a small section of additional revenue on a Sunday, on public holidays, and yet we know that the industry is being cut and jobs are being lost. Tons of jobs are being lost. The Green Party does not support this legislation. We have grave concerns around the commercialisation of advertising, targeting our tamariki mokopuna, and we argue that actually it's about sustainable long-term funding for public broadcasting, which includes whakaata Māori, which includes iwi Māori radio, and the government has failed to do that. This legislation does not address the wider issues that we are facing. And yes, you might argue that viewer trends have changed and, the way that people are consuming their TV is different. But at the end of the day, many of us do watch Sunday TV and enjoy a bit of Jack Tame, Q&A or marae, wakahuia, and then those with mokopuna might watch What Now or the Home and Aways or a little bit of, UK's Got Talent or whatever's going on a Sunday morning. But to consider what the public broadcasting opportunity here is for us as a House to really consider what do we do to support sustainable public broadcasting, and that's not being addressed in this legislation. We are unclear on actually what the profits will be back to broadcasting. We're really sceptical around the use of commercial advertising that will now target our tamariki mokopuna, and why clog up a quiet Sunday or public holidays, your Christmas, your Anzac Day, your Easter holiday weekends, so you can spend time with whānau and just sit in front of the TV and maybe have a coffee. But, you know, while some in the television industry might say, if we don't have access to this revenue, the $6 million, you know, it makes it hard for us. The bigger question is, where is the dollar in the first place? Because it's the priorities of this government that have shown that tax cuts for landlords is a bigger priority to the government than is the broadcasting industry. And so what? We're going to now open up for our rā tapu viewing, taking away the tapu of the Sunday and now open it up for commercial advertising. The Green Party don't support this legislation. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm taking this call on behalf of ACT to support the Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill. Madam Speaker, this bill makes a very simple change, but a very important change to the Broadcasting Act 1989. As that Act, we know, as it says, Act 1989, we can see that it's outdated in some aspects, and one of the aspects that is outdated is Section 81. And so this bill is to repeal Section 81. It doesn't do anything that we have heard from the previous speaker. It doesn't give any funding to any media outlet. What it does is it gives the opportunity to traditional linear TV and radio broadcasts to go out and compete with other platforms to generate the revenue that they can through advertising. Madam Speaker, on this side, we don't mind sitting with our cup of coffee in front of TV or radio, listening to radio or watching TV when there are some ads being played, because we know that that's how they are going to generate revenue. And Madam Speaker, on this side, we also believe that taxpayers should not be funding any businesses, because media companies are like businesses, any other businesses, and so we should not be funding these media outlets through taxpayers' money, and then taxpayers' money should not be bailing out any struggling media companies. It's up to them to go out, create value for their customers, for their audience, to attract advertising. Madam Speaker, we want to make sure, because of the advancement of technology that we have seen, there are so many different types of platforms available now for people to watch news, to watch programs, that the Section 81 doesn't apply to those platforms. We want to see that it becomes fair for traditional linear TV and radio as well, so that they can also generate revenue through advertising. Yes, the estimated value is around $6 million, but it's up to them. They can go out, compete, create value, generate as much as they like in revenue through advertising. Madam Speaker, it's very important also to note that, that this is about modernizing our Act. This is about modernizing our Act. It's not about anything else that we have heard from the previous speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, as the chair of the Economic Development, Science and Innovation Select Committee, I want to thank everybody who was involved in the consideration of this bill. I also want to thank all submitters. We received 41 submissions and we heard from 6 submitters, which was really a good, I would say 41 submissions on this bill is a very good number. And as it happens, we had a range of views from submitters. Some submitters thought that the restriction should be extended to all platforms, which we know is not going to be feasible. Some thought that maybe it should be a partial restriction, but we have to also take into consideration the cost of that. And that's why, Madam Speaker, we have decided that it should be a full repeal of Section 81. And it makes sense, Madam Speaker. As I said, media companies are like businesses, any other businesses that we have, and taxpayers should not be bailing out any struggling companies. It's up to them to go out and generate revenue, and they will generate revenue if they are able to attract audience. So we support this bill and commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Jenny Marcroft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll begin my contribution with, and it's an unusual thing, it's an unusual feeling to actually be in agreement or in alignment with the Green Party. But on this particular issue, New Zealand First, we stand on a conservative platform, and therefore, in terms of the Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill, we do not support this piece of legislation. Section 81, the removal of it, because it currently restricts broadcast TV advertising on Sunday and Anzac morning, and both TV and radio broadcast advertising on Christmas Day, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. These days, we believe, are special days, and New Zealand has a very strong Christian foundation, and at the time that a boundary was drawn carving out these days as meaningful for religious observance, as meaningful to acknowledge those who served our country in wars overseas. Many Kiwis, though, may no longer be particularly religious in terms of their participation in formal services of worship and celebration, but this does not mean that they are not spiritual and that we should see every day as the same. So that the boundaries that we draw around our working lives and our special celebrations, we believe these are extremely important and we should uphold these. We would be all the more poorer without them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the submissions on the bill were fairly evenly split, for and opposed. And I'll speak to some of those that were opposed to this piece of legislation. They basically said there was frustration currently at an overabundance of advertising already. Immense spiritual and cultural significance for Pacifica communities, and that's why they oppose this piece of legislation. That's the Pacifica Media Trust. The disrespect this bill has towards our fallen soldiers and Christianity. So those were some of the themes coming through that oppose this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one of the submissions from, which I particularly enjoyed reading, was from Tom Fruin, who has a deep understanding of the media sector. And what he said was that any extra revenue generated by allowing advertising on these particular days goes directly to the television broadcasters, directly to the radio stations, and not the program makers, particularly when we're talking about TV content. The ongoing production and distribution of local content, the repeal of Section 81 restrictions will in fact have the opposite effect. They will not receive any extra money for content making. Sunday mornings have become the time for screening special interest programs, and my colleague Huhana Linden outlined a number of those special programs that attract minority audience of little value to advertisers, although don't tell Jack Tame that. Madam Speaker, Sunday mornings, as we've heard, and I quote from Tom Fruin, this is now a home for important series such as Tangata Pacifica, Attitude, that's for people with disabilities, Q&A, political current affairs, if you didn't know that, Praise Be, our religious program, Neighbourhood for community diversity, and What Now for children. So those are really important programs, and if there was commercialisation pumped in around those programs, the value of those time slots would change and those programs might be pushed out to where there's absolutely no audience or might be gone altogether. Take a look at Sunday. Madam Speaker, the important role of television in connecting to marginalised, niche or other non-commercial audience should not be overlooked. Sunday morning has become a place to do that. Madam Speaker, it's thought around $6, maybe a little bit more $1 million will be generated by freeing up advertising on these special days. Now, this is based on assumption. This is based on what the industry had said they may charge out at a rate card rate for those particular advertising slots. But what is not known is this new money coming in from advertisers, or will they just cut their advertising pie to spread it out across those days and so not actually generate any new revenue going to the advertisers? There is no guarantee of new money coming in. Advertising budgets will be spread over additional days. That is what I believe will happen because advertising budgets are already constrained. They're not going to necessarily find brand new money to add into these extra days, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to address, finally, Madam Speaker, comments made by the Labour member Reuben Davidson criticising the Minister. Well, it's not my job to defend the Minister, he can do that himself. However, what I would like to point out in terms of what Labour did when they were in government, spending a whole lot of money on a failed merger of RNZ and TVNZ, $20 million. It was going to be more than $300 million to merge those two entities, but at the very last minute, just weeks before the legislation got passed through, what did they do? Their leader, the Prime Minister of the time, Chris Hipkins, pulled the big handbrake on it, and what a waste of $20 million. That is your legacy in terms of supporting the media industry, not to mention the $55 million that was pumped into the media, which really broke the trust of our media entities. Public have really pushed back. They do not trust media. They do not trust news. All you have to do is look at every survey which shows that. In fact, they are avoiding the news like the plague, and that $55 million for the Public Interest Journalism Fund did not help that. So Labour, take a look in the mirror. I do not commend this bill to the House.
Mariamino Kapakingi.
Morena, thank you. So, second reading round, and I'm going to take a short call, probably to match the size of the bill. And yes, I know, 70-something, I think. Anyway, and yes, so I think 2.5 pages if you print it one-sided. But anyway, there were a couple of comments that the Minister made this morning, and I just want to speak to those. One of them was the playing field. And probably what I want to say to that is that it must be a very tiny playfield when you're talking about a 73-word bill. And so why would we? Why would we bother? You know, what's the motive behind that? Well, we know what that is, so, and I think that's been expressed, and probably in the third reading we'll express it even more. But what it does match, I think, in terms of living the playing field and the tiny field that it reflects is it's more like the size of a Facebook or an Instagram caption. You'll probably find more than that than you might in the bill. The other phrase that was used, or word that was used, and then contradicted by the ACT Party this morning was the Minister did use the word modernise. It was stated, and so I want to say to that, if modernising means cramming, bombarding, pushing, forcing, all of that propaganda and all of that advertising every single day, that can't be modernising. That's just making already a bombardment every day worsens it. So surely, why wouldn't you just leave a good idea alone? Leave that idea. Leave the Sundays alone. Leave those special days alone. Those days have a history. They have a good history, and they're a good idea. So again, I don't want to go too long because I want to match the size of the bill. But to say leave it alone. In fact, keep it sacrosanct. I think, in fact, support it. And to suggest that $6 million is going to do terribly much, I think, is again the same size as the bill. Not a lot of excise to it, nor a real recognition of the missing bits that really need support in the advertising world. So leave Sunday alone for me, because that day we're not particularly religious, but we are deeply spiritual, and we read things on a Sunday like the pedagogy of the oppressed and such like really good, ordinary reading that would open the minds of people and things like that. So, just leave the Sundays alone, damn it, and let the minds of our mokopuna, our tupuna, leave them alone and stop this bad idea, Minister. Anyway, Kānui tēnā. Obviously, clearly by my discussion, we will not be supporting this bad idea. Kia ora tātou.
Dr. Lawrence Zinam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gosh, 5 minutes is not enough for me to talk about this bill. We'll start with the fact that the Green Party does not support this bill. And we'll start by, let's talk about and address the problem and I guess the problem statement of this bill, which is what we're seeing is a chronic underfunding of our public media, and they're hoping the repeal of Section 81 of the Broadcasting Act is going to plug that gap. Well, it certainly isn't, because as we see in the departmental report, there is a hypothetical $6 million in revenue. Hypothetical. They actually don't know. It could be nothing. And as we heard previously from the previous speaker, Jenny Marcroft, that there is no telling if this is just going to be spread over the other days, or in terms of the advertising revenue, that it's just going to be balanced out. So in fact, by doing this, we may not get any revenue, or the broadcasting area sector may not get any revenue. And that is stated in paragraph 21 of the departmental report. At the same time, what we are seeing, instead of funding our public media sector, we're seeing $2.9 billion for landlords. That is almost 500 times of this hypothetical revenue that might be gained for repealing of Section 81. Not to mention other wasteful spending that we see from the government, such as additional blue and yellow tapes, like the Ministry of Regulations with a budget tag of $20 million and not very much to show for it, and overlaps severely with some work that the Parliament is already doing. So that's one of the problems that we are seeing. And, I think the bigger question that people should be asking when they are looking at bills like this, which has the broader ramification of a government that wants to see further privatization of the media sector, because the public sector will actually put their policies and their leaders online and on the hook and justify to the New Zealand public on why the decisions that they are making and also the positions that they are taking, because it's what media should be doing, and it's what good public media should be doing. So again, this is the government trying to also address an interesting endo-exothermic conundrum where what happens when you have hot air and snowflakes at the same time. So that's one part of the problem that we're trying to deal with. The other part, talking about consistency and modernization. This is something that the minister himself has talked about. And then, yes, we do see a change in our media landscape. And yes, the department report does mention that streaming services and also TV on demand are not subjected to Section 81, and also certain areas on radio as well is not subjected to that. But interestingly, the minister used the example of YouTube. And I would actually ask the House and also just members here in general to observe, in fact, YouTube does not have advertisement on Christmas Day, and also does not have advertisement on Easter holidays, because YouTube, for an American company, also understands the importance of those days. Yet, even though it's been quoted by the minister, the irony is that we are repealing this so that we can have advertisement on those days, as opposed to bringing up the standards altogether and encompassing these. And according to the departmental report, again, paragraph 60, that seems to be too challenging to do. So what we do see is a cop-out that rather than bringing everything up, and we've heard from the previous speakers, of the importance of those days, as well as the importance for our children not to be subjected to advertisement, and also in the marginalized communities, we are not seeing the government taking an accountability approach to this. So the Green Party will not support this bill, and we also encourage others to not support it, like the Greens and New Zealand First.
Vanessa Wiener, Dr. Vanessa Wiener.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a member of the Economic Development, Science and Innovation Select Committee, it's a pleasure to be able to speak on the Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill in its second reading. We went through a excellent set of hearings from submitters, from those who are impacted by this bill. I thank those who've made submissions and also the rest of the committee who took this through in a diligent manner. It is a small bill, but it does make some changes that will mean that it increases the competitiveness across the system slightly. Even a small amount of money for broadcasters in this day and age is worthwhile, and I commend the bill to the House.
Helen White.
Thank you. Labour Party is supporting this legislation, but you will have heard Ruben Davidson talk about it as a drip rather than what we need to support this sector. I know that there's been lots of beautiful analogies, snowflakes. I think my favourite is the snowflakes in hot air today. But my own analogy is we're just fiddling while Rome burns. We have a situation here where we know that an important part of our democracy is our fourth estate. And in this situation, our response is woefully inadequate. We are bringing a piece of legislation to the House today which repeals a section where the total cost of or benefit to the media sector is $6 million. And it just isn't very much money at all. As my friend Ruben Davidson pointed out, the job losses are huge in this area, but I want to contribute to this debate my concern that what we have here is an utter erosion of our democracy. We have an absolute need to look at this problem in a wider way than we do today. And while we support this legislation because it is a drip, and we hope that there will be some more water added to the bucket in the next little while, which is what the government is supposed to do. It's supposed to lead in this area. It's supposed to support things and recognise the crisis that we have and address it. We have heard people throw stones at the Labour Party and what it didn't do. Well, I have news for the government. It is supposed to lead. And recently what we've heard is a lot of criticism of Labour from the government, when I'm not sure that the government realises what its job is right now is to lead, and it needs to be brave. Government has a role, and we all recognise that. That's why we're in this House. That's why we've given up our other jobs, and we're in this House. It has to lead. It has to be bright and smart and lead. And what I see here is a complete lack of leadership, because we've got a tiny bill, a tiny drip, when we should be getting more. And I just want to go back to one of those other analogies that Ruben Davidson talked about. I understand he gave a cake to the minister because there had been big promises of fixing this area and that hadn't been done. And he was celebrating that fact. And I wondered if that cake was a sponge cake, because in this situation, it seems like it is full of air and very little substance. And I hope it was a sponge cake, and I hope the analogy was understood. But if this government wants to build something better in this sector, then absolutely we will be supporting it. And so we're taking a different position from our friends in the Greens and New Zealand First on this one. And we do recognise what they're saying. We recognise that this is an erosion of something that is peace and quiet for people, is non-commercial. Absolutely, in a perfect world, I would love to be able to support that position. But we've taken a pragmatic decision because we can see people are desperate in this sector, and this is something. This is a drip. So we're supporting the drip here. We're trying to make sure that we support any action. But it is so little action that it is of alarming concern. And we have a population that relies on our media, and we are allowing it to be gutted. And there was an attempt by Labour to try and address these issues, and we are no longer in government. So we cannot be the people who fix this time, and time is of the essence. This is a crisis. This erodes democracy. This changes the way that things work in this country forever. It couldn't be a more important time to act. And we have changes in the media that are super significant, and yet we are not seeing that plan. So we're a bit desperate on this side of the House to see change take place. And we know that the voters chose this government to do that. So my challenge to this government is add to this drip. We're giving you our support for it. Add to this drip. Make sure that you're adding some substance to the cake. Make sure you are not fiddling while Rome burns, because what I am concerned about is it's not the only area that I'm seeing this in. I am seeing this happen across portfolios because of an ideology that says it's the market. We'll just step back. Well, it can't just be the market, because we've got the market, people. And look where we're at. We've got a market in a changing world, and we are failing our people in this country. And when we have something as important at stake as our democracy, and we do, we have social media coming out with garbage. People are believing it over what should be our trusted media. And when we gut hundreds of jobs. We are gutting not only the jobs, but the knowledge, the commitment to broadcasting standards, because those people disappear. They also change, they morph. If you leave it to the market, what you get is a bunch of people who are just looking for clickbait. They are no longer going to be as qualified, they are no longer going to be as committed to values. And some of the brightest people I have ever met are journalists. They are often highly knowledgeable. And we have been basically ignoring the need to support that depth in our community. We call it the fourth estate for a reason. It is incredibly important as a pillar of democracy. And it is no accident that we have seen democracies eroded in other countries as our fourth estate has been eroded, has been undermined. These are bright people. We need to support them. They aren't alone. There are other areas that are under attack too. There are people like our scientists who absolutely need the same kind of leadership from government. And so I'm not saying they're the only crisis, their only fire in town. We have a few fires in our own. But this is a very important one. It is a plank of our democracy. And where are we? We are at a point of crisis. So we have decided to add our voice to supporting this bill, but not because we think it is going to address much at all, because it is a start. And there is a difference, and there is a reason why I am not in a party with more with the values or the way that the Greens and New Zealand First are in. There is a difference. I belong to a party that I consider pretty pragmatic and that is prepared to do this kind of thing. And I hear the laughs from the National Party above, but I'm just wondering whether in fact they are actually able to take into account that value in a pragmatic opposition that is mature and is prepared to support them in this bill, or whether they'd like us to join a more extreme position. Because that's what they ask for when they laugh when I say I'm supporting this bill and I'm actually talking about the bill in a way that is nuanced. That's what they invite. They invite people to move to an extreme position because that's what that arrogance gets to. It gets to people getting desperate and moving away. So I hope that the member of the government who's laughing at the present time thinks about that. That arrogance also gets you unelected pretty damn fast. That kind of smugness gets you unelected. It is the government's job to come up with better ways to help the broadcasters in our society, and it needs to start to take that job seriously instead of relying on the old drivel of we'll leave it to the market and abandonment of this sector. Otherwise, there'll be a change of government next time. Thank you. I commend the bill to the House.
Thank you. Before I take the next call, I just want to remind members to focus what's on the bill. It is a narrow bill, and it does repeal Section 81 of the Broadcasting Act, and I know that members have been talking about that, but just as a reminder as we move forward, I call Dr. Hamish Campbell.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that guidance. We have heard a lot of hot air around this bill, but I stand to support the repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill. Yes, it is a very small bill. Since the Broadcasting Act in 1989 came in, technology, audience consumption habits have changed. The event of internet, smartphones and the emergence of on-demand and streaming services has meant that fewer people are engaging with content through traditional linear forms. This bill, this amendment will actually make sure it's a level playing field so the media companies can actually also compete with those streaming services. Also, if we look at society, when this bill was enacted, we didn't even have Sunday trading. Things have moved on. This is a pragmatic bill. It fixes up a problem, and therefore I commend it to the House.
The next call is a split call. I call Camilla Ballich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleasure to take a call on this particular bill that focuses on one relatively small section of the Broadcasting Act. And I have just been reading this particular section. I know your direction, Mr. Speaker, is to focus on this particular act. And I think what it's important to remember here is the perilous time that we're in relation to trust in not only government but also in the news media. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that they have had a lot of trouble maintaining the provision that they have with the amount of money that they have. And so this bill provides a small amount of money to the news media to be able to do that fundamentally important work that is important to democracy. And so I, like other speakers, recognise that there are different views on the House in relation to this, and this is because some of the days that we're talking about have special religious significance to some people in this House, and I think that's a valid perspective and that's a valid point of view. But on our side of the House, on this particular bill in the Labour Party, we have decided to support this bill because of the very, very important situation, and I think how the need that we have for support of our news media in this country. So I think that's the first point. Firstly, the reason we support it is because of the importance of our independent media and the important democratic role that it plays. The second point is really that since this particular Section 81 was passed, times have changed and the way that we consume media has changed. And I think everyone in the House, no matter how they're voting on this bill today, would recognise that. I watch many of the programs that were mentioned in the House. I watch Q&A on a Sunday. I watch it on my iPad, and I do get advertising on that pops up. I hadn't appreciated if I'd turned on my television that maybe I would have had a ad-free experience, and I think probably that's the experience of many people in New Zealand. So this bill does modernise and keep up with the times, really, in terms of our consumption of media. The other point that I wanted to note that I haven't heard but may have been mentioned in some of the initial speeches was just to focus on the fact that this, currently in our legislation, if there's a broadcast that is broadcast primarily for audiences outside of New Zealand, the provisions of Section 81 actually don't apply anyway. So it's totally possible to even to be watching television or listening to radio, and if the purpose of that broadcast is actually to be wider than New Zealand, then there would be advertising. So I think that's probably slightly a loophole, and probably in terms of the way that we consume media in New Zealand, actually something that we need to be thinking about closing. And so I think that's a positive aspect of this bill, that it levels the playing field in terms of the people who are broadcasting from overseas and our New Zealand distributors as well. So those are the clear points here. Is this enough? Is this enough to support our news media and to make sure that that essential fourth estate is able to keep holding us in this House, the people with power in New Zealand, to account? No, this isn't enough. It's a small amount that we think is worth supporting, even though it's small, but we also think that more needs to be done. And I think you've clearly heard that through the advocacy of our spokesperson in this area, Ruben Davidson. He is passionate about supporting New Zealand journalists. He's passionate about supporting New Zealand journalism. And we here recognise that although sometimes journalists will make our lives more difficult through reporting on things that we do in ways that we don't necessarily appreciate, the fact of them being there and doing that role is essential to our democracy. My father was a journalist growing up. I have an immense amount of respect for the vast majority of journalists in New Zealand. I think they do a fantastic job, and I think they are often overtly criticised for being for not doing that, when actually what they do want to do is just report and do their best to do their job. It might not always what we as politicians want to hear, but it's essential to a country that is democratic. News media is absolutely essential, and they do need more support, and we do need to rely on them if we do want to continue with our strong democracy that we have had for a long time. So we support this bill, and we urge the government to go further.
Mr. Speaker, I actually I stand to support the bill, obviously, but I want to raise a new point, which is this bill will allow advertisement on TVs on Sundays. That is 52 Sundays in a year. 52 Sundays, that is extra 14.2% of possible revenue and opportunity for TVs to have ads. That's where the national government is supporting, because we are allowing businesses to have that freedom, to have that opportunity to grow new revenue that they've always been restricted on. That is a very, very important field. And to be honest, this bill, when it was first enacted in 1989, that was before the internet, before cell phones, before all of these portable digital advices that we actually all use on a Sunday. So now, fast forward 36 years later, I think it's time now that it is to be modernised, and therefore I support the bill to the House.
Well done.
E te manga o te whare. Tēnā koe te manga o te whare. Kei te tuau ki te kōrero mō tēnei pere, e pāna ki ngā pānui hoko I runga I ngā rā tapu. Ahakoa kei te tautoko mātou I tēnei pere, he nui aku whakatūpatotanga, hei whakaarotanga mā mātou o tēnei paremata. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill. While I support it, I come with some cautionary whakaaro for us to consider as a parliament. Back in my day, Mr. Speaker, if you wanted to watch a program, say Sons and Daughters, you had to be sat down at 5:30 p.m. Ads were a time to make a cup of tea and maybe quickly go and hang out the washing. Nowadays, Mr. Speaker, it comes to you whether you like it or not. You can be scrolling and advertisements while you're watching on demand just pop up on your devices. The reason, as I've stated, that we are supporting this bill is to try and level the playing field for a struggling broadcasting sector. $6 million, does it go far enough? Absolutely not. That wouldn't even be enough to support programming on one channel of television here in New Zealand. It is a drop in the ocean, or as Ruben Davidson so aptly put it, a drip on the fire. But if it'll bring some reprieve to our struggling broadcasting sector, then it is something we will support. But what really needs to be happening is more support from the government for this sector. Hoi anō rā e te manga o te whare, ka hoki au ki ngā rā tapu. to our sacred days. E tēnei te mihi ki ngā hoia o roto o Aotearoa whānui, hoia no o roto o Ikaroa Rāwhiti, ngā uri a C Company and D Company. Mr. Speaker, in the Waiapu Valley, Anzac Day is the biggest calendar event of the year. People make the pilgrimage home to our RSA, as they do at RSAs across Aotearoa, to remember our fallen soldiers. And these are the cautionary tales I think we need to consider, is remembering the sanctity of these days and what they mean to so many whānau across the country. So while we support this, there must be some consideration about the dignity and the standard of advertising that happens in these slots. Mr. Speaker, I personally have enjoyed a career in broadcasting. And the discussion here today is about dollars and cents. What it should be about is people and stories. What good quality funding does for our broadcasting agencies is allow people to hear their stories and see their faces. Good quality broadcasting allows us to preserve whakapapa, celebrate our people, and report current affairs as they affect whānau. That's why we need to take this legislation far further, and we need a commitment from the government to increase funding for the preservation of our stories. Good quality broadcasting allows us to hear, for example, our real Māori in real context. We've talked about people who have lost jobs. This bill not only doesn't go far enough in terms of financial support for the industry, it doesn't go far enough in terms of what is it funding? There's no commitment, and there's certainly no commitment to preserving pāpaho Māori broadcasting. Not only the storytelling, the retention, the preservation of our stories, our reo and our whakapapa, and the celebration of New Zealand stories, New Zealand faces, New Zealand-made content, not mentioned, not guaranteed. It also doesn't go far enough in encouraging people into careers in broadcasting. We've talked about YouTube, and these days, like I said, when I have conversations with my colleagues, my previous colleagues from the broadcasting days, broadcasting is not so much an attractive career option for rangatahi Māori now. People are becoming TikTok famous, they're developing YouTube channels, and while kei te pai tērā, sometimes in that, Mr. Speaker, production values can be lost. And so that's why we need to support good industry and support good investment. And this bill, like I said, while we support levelling the playing field, this bill does not go far enough. Mātauranga Māori is something that we risk losing, having captured by our good quality broadcasters without investment. And as I say again, maintaining the sanctity of our rā tapu while preserving our stories, not just kōrero Māori, kaupapa Māori, New Zealand stories. People want to hear and see and feel their own faces and stories and whakapapa broadcast with dignity. Nā reira, e te māngai o te whare. Once again, as I said, we do want to support this bill merely for the fact to try and make the playing field fairer for our broadcasters, but it does not go far enough, and we call on the government to increase funding to support the industry, not just at its current state, but to secure a future for good quality broadcasting here in Aotearoa. Tēnā koe te māngai o te whare.
Dan Bidwell.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be the last speaker in this debate and to echo, I think, the sentiment in the House, which is times have changed and the media has to change with it, and no much more so than our public media. So my message to the media industry and our message is clear: adapt to those changing times. Don't expect the government to continue to bail you out. Make sure you're meeting the needs of New Zealanders, and you'll be, I'm sure, rewarded handsomely through market mechanisms. This bill makes a very simple change that does give some relief. $6 million is not insignificant, but it doesn't change the bare bone reality of the sector, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I'll just end by saying I commend this bill to the House.
This bill was the subject of a conscience vote for its first reading, so I'm prepared to accept one for this reading if members wish. This is the process we are going to follow. I'm going to put the question, I'm going to announce the result. At that stage, any member may ask for a personal vote. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. A split vote. A split vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumāori mā ngā poti whakahe.
Act New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
0 in favour and 8 against.
Te Pāti Māori.
Okay, that's a new one. E rima ngā poti kore I whakai.
Democracy. The ayes are 94, the noes are 28. The question is agreed to.
Broadcasting Repeal of Advertising Restrictions Amendment Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. I call on Government Order of the Day, number 5.
Statutes Amendment Bill, second reading.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Mr. Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Statutes Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Statutes Amendment Bill now be read a second time. As the House will be aware, Statutes Amendment Bills are legislative vehicles that make small, technical and non-controversial amendments to a number of acts. These bills allow amendments to be made that would not usually receive sufficient priority to be progressed individually. This bill is a great example of regulatory stewardship and ensures our legislation remains fit for purpose and up to date. The amendments covered by the bill include correcting drafting errors, updating language and clarifications. The bill, as reported back, amends 41 primary acts administered by various government agencies. Each of the amendments in the bill has received unanimous cross-party support. The bill was reported back to the Governance and Administration Committee on 16 April 2025. I'd like to thank the committee for their careful consideration of the bill and the submitters for their contributions. The committee makes several recommendations that clarify and refine the bill. The bill as introduced includes an amendment to the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Act that intends to clarify that address verification is only required in higher risk circumstances. The committee recommends an amendment to make it clear that address verification is not required as part of a standard customer due diligence process, but only as part of an enhanced customer due diligence process. This clarification will provide immediate regulatory relief to businesses that have been conservative in their interpretation of address verification requirements, resulting in over-compliance. The change reflects the original policy intent that address verification is only required in high-risk scenarios, while also addressing submitters' concerns that the original drafting left too much room for interpretation. The committee also recommends an amendment to the Privacy Act 2020. This amendment clarifies that in the 6-month limitation period for a complainant to bring proceedings in the Human Rights Review Tribunal starts only when the Privacy Commissioner or Director of Human Rights Proceedings has made final decisions about all related complaints and matters. and has notified the complainant about those decisions under relevant provisions in the Privacy Act 2020. This will assist the Privacy Commissioner's endeavours to settle substantive complaints and reduce the likelihood of adversarial behaviour between parties. The bill also includes an amendment to the Oaths and Declarations Act to allow oaths to be made and declarations to be taken remotely. The proposal makes permanent similar changes that were in force during the COVID lockdowns to reduce accessibility barriers. The committee recommended changes to the proposals in the bill that relate to the Oaths and Declarations Act. The main change is to ensure that the administrator can see the person taking the oath or making the declaration to reduce the risk of coercion by requiring the video to be on at all times. Lastly, the committee recommends removing the amendments to the Racing Industry Act 2020 and some of the amendments to the Conservation Act 1987 from this bill. The amendments to the Racing Industry Act and proposed changes to the Conservation Act were considered as part of other pieces of work. Part 20 of the bill amends the Incorporated Societies Act 2022. The committee has recommended that the House note that a number of changes were proposed by the New Zealand Amateur Sport Association, which were substantive in nature. The committee did not propose any amendment as the proposals were out of scope of the bill, but they did suggest the issue be further investigated. I have already taken the step of writing to the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs highlighting this matter for further consideration. Mr. Speaker, the bill will come into force the day after royal assent. In summary, Mr. Speaker, this bill will provide much needed changes to the statute book. The amendments will ensure New Zealand's legislation operates efficiently and effectively. Again, I thank the committee for their work on the bill and I welcome their recommendations. I look forward to the passage of this bill through its remaining stages and working constructively with parties as similar bills are put together in the future. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Your Honour, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exciting piece of legislation. It is actually an interesting function of Parliament to go through, essentially to take recommendations from all departments and ministers as to what is essentially tidy-ups. And it's important to kind of understand the parliamentary procedure here because statutes amendments bills are pretty much by definition not substantive amendments. Substantive amendments belong somewhere else, quite often in an omnibus bill, and then we have kind of the bills we're more used to seeing, which are, you know, really weighty subject matter bills. But this bill essentially is part of the function of government and parliament in good regulatory stewardship. So the suggestion by some parties that we don't have a system of good regulatory stewardship doesn't really hold water. And this is a good example of government departments ferreting away, combing through the legislation for which they have responsibility, identifying bits that the language is outdated or another amendment means it's no longer entirely consistent and where clarifications are needed. There is a genuine moot point about when something stops being a statutes amendment tidy up, modernisation perhaps, and when it starts being a substantive amendment. But there's a very strong convention that if a member identifies an element of a statutes amendment bill that they consider is substantive and should be separately dealt with or dealt with in a substantive piece of legislation, then it should come out. And I know my friend and colleague Camilla Bellich, who sat on the committee, will probably talk about the Oaths and Declaration amendments. And it is a good example where it's at the threshold where there were changes as to how oaths and declarations could be made. And I understand these changes were made on an interim basis in COVID, and obviously face-to-face interactions with lawyers and other people who were authorised to take declarations weren't possible. So we had this kind of audio-visual idea. And look, I do want to say that there are concerns, because we sometimes are a bit flippant or offhand about oaths and declarations, but a lot of what we do is rests on the trustworthiness of information provided. And so it is important to have essentially the solemn moment where you say, well, this is my affidavit, or this is my statutory declaration, even this is my passport photo, and say, and I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that it's true, that it is a true likeness, rather than sort of saying, oh, there it is. And so going online's one thing, but the suggestion was that you could have an audio, I think, rather than an audio-visual interaction. So basically you could be on the phone and say, have you got this document in front of you? Is it true? Now, it's a bit loose. And so, quite rightly, that was reviewed and the members of the committee addressed it. Now, I've got another 6 odd minutes left, so I thought I'd just list off all of the amendments. Or not. Look, it's a bill we're all behind. I did want to make those points around the functions of statutes, amendments, bills, and the importance of members looking at them genuinely and making sure that they do the job and that they don't overstep the mark of genuine statutes, amendments, bill. But with that, I'll leave it, and obviously we'll be supporting this bill.
Dr. Lawrence Zenan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand, to also support the Statutes Amendment Bill. And I think, like the previous speakers have mentioned, this is a really interesting function, and particularly a really interesting bill. Throughout, over the last few months, what we have heard is a number of regulatory system bills, which makes those sort of I guess in some ways mechanical changes and minute changes to a number of legislation as an omnibus bill, which is essentially a combination of these sort of amendments to multiple bills at the same time. However, the Statutes Amendment Bill has an additional function in this case, which is that the bill should have unanimous approval by the Parliament. And it's also important to point out that in this particular amendment bill, so in this particular amendment bill, for those particular members or particular parties that are not represented on select committee, in this case, we do thank the GNA, Governance and Administration Committee, for their consideration of this bill. But for those members or parties that are not represented on the select committee, they are also kept in the loop of the progress of this bill in order to achieve that unanimous support from the House of Representatives on this omnibus bill. Now, it has been mentioned as well that although the introduction of the commentary of the bill talks about making 96 amendments to 42 acts, it's important to note that, as the Minister stated in her contribution at the beginning, that now it is only 41 acts and not 42. So some of I will highlight, I won't be going through all 41 acts, I will highlight some of the important aspects of these acts. And to start with, it is mentioned that the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Act being one of, I guess, a key element of this particular omnibus bill. And as we have heard also just this week, and also as we have seen in the Justice Select Committee, that there are a number of bills that are currently relating to AML, CFT, that's going through the House right now. And as we see from the Financial Task Force in their report, that this is an area that requires update. Now, a number of those updates ostensibly are substantial and deserves amendment bills in their own right, and we have seen the second of those amendments being introduced in the House this week, with a possible third one on the way, as indicated by the minister in charge. But in this case, the omnibus bill that we see here makes a minute change that sets out customer due diligence requirements that reporting entities such as casinos or financing institutions must fulfill, as well as amending areas such as addressing verification of a customer, beneficial owner of a customer, or person acting on behalf of a customer is only required according to the level of risk involved in the transaction, which offers a level of flexibility that we see that is required for this bill. A second part that is substantial in the Statutes Amendment Bill is around the Oath and Declaration Act. And one of the key adjustments, and I'll talk more about the ability for government to make such changes to regulations, and also the flexibility that it offers and the updates and modernization it is required a little bit later. But in the specific context of the Oath and Declaration Act, what we are seeing is that it allows oath affirmations and declarations to be administered and oath to be taken by audio-visual link or audio link. And this is, although seems minute, is an important step in allowing accessibility to the way that we look at our affirmation and declaration, particularly in light of the pandemic, where if we do have situations that people aren't able to do it in person, they're able to have that flexibility to do it online. And we're happy to see this being introduced as part of the Statutes Amendment Bill to offer even more and even greater accessibility and inclusion to people who are making affirmations or declarations. Thirdly, another substantial change of this bill out of the 41 acts that are being amended is the Privacy Act. And in this case, this is inserting a new clause, 132A, in this amendment, which would amend Section 98 of the Principal Act, which is the Privacy Act, and sets out when a person can commence proceedings in the Human Rights Review Tribunal. And it specifies that a person must commence proceedings within 6 months of being notified of a decision by the Privacy Commissioner or Director of the Tribunal, and also further clarifies in the cases where there are 2 or more related complainants that the 6-month limitation period will begin only after decisions for all of the related complainants have been made and notified, which is again an important step in allowing for that flexibility, but also it makes sense in the case which currently isn't allowed under the existing legislation. One final point I would like to make in terms of some of the bigger changes that is noticed within this bill is around changes to the Defense Act, and particularly around certain changes as recommended on the inclusion and using a more gender-neutral term of aviator as opposed to the existing terminologies that is in the legislation, because we do recognize the amazing diversity of the people who are serving our country as part of that. Those are some of the major changes that we see in this bill. However, it is also worth noting that 2 particular areas have been removed as a result of the Select Committee process. And again, we do thank everyone, although there are few submissions on this bill because it is a technical bill in nature. We do thank everyone who has submitted on the bill. But it is worth noting that there are 2 particular legislation as a result of the Select Committee process has been removed from this because of other considerations. The first one being the Conservation Act. And the reason that clause 25 and 32, actually 25 and 33, have been removed as a result of this bill, as a result of the Select Committee process, is because it is considered under the broader consultation and changes to that Principal Act, which is currently taking place. However, I would note that there are certain areas of this, particularly in light to the defense for a charge if a defendant can show that the discharge of contaminants, which is the removed Clause 33, is something that is worth greater attention as part of that consultation process because of the fact that there is a genuine concern from the Greens around the way that our Conservation Act works and the way that it has been ironically diluted, that potentially has a potential to allow more contamination of a natural environment. So that is something that is definitely worth further attention. It is also worth noting that although the majority of the Conservation Act in this case has been removed, that Clause 34 has been retained, which is around taking indigenous freshwater fish without authority. And this is specifically to do with a person must not take indigenous freshwater fish from any freshwater except in accordance with certain sections of that primary legislation, and anyone who fails to comply will be considered as an infringement offense. And it is important for this as adjustment to the Conservation Act. In terms of the Racing Industries Act, it is important to note that the original Part 33 of this bill on Racing Industry Act has already been incorporated as a part of another bill that's already been introduced in the House, and therefore it is redundant for us to introduce it here in this bill. So for the final little bit, Mr. Speaker, I would like to mention that bills like this shows the incredible work that this Parliament and the House of Representatives do in order to update our regulations and legislation in a way that doesn't take a lot of additional resources and in a way that is done with the support of the entire House and is a part of the normal function of Parliament. And we see these sort of changes all the time through regular system bills or omnibus such as this. And we don't need to look for other avenues to make greater changes. So the Greens support this bill.
Next call. Tim Costley.
I just want to highlight very briefly a couple. The key changes obviously is the conservation and racing amendments, because conservation is being done separately by that Minister of Racing. We have already passed that act, so that doesn't need to be included. On the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financial Terrorism Act, it is an area where I think we've brought some clarity. Some of us would like to go further. However, in the nature of a statutes amendment bill that needs to be small, minor, non-technical and non-controversial changes, there wasn't the ability to go any further. I would like to highlight that amendments to the Incorporated Societies Act got a surprising amount of interest, because there are a number of changes that groups like the Amateur Sports Society of New Zealand would like to see made, but I do note that that has been picked up in a members' bill which is in the ballot in the name of Laura McClure, and I commend her for the work she's doing there. I'm sure everyone would have noticed that the legislative statement in paragraph 10 mentions a change to having audio link or audio-visual link. Can I just highlight that actually under the Oaths and Declarations Act, it is only an audio-visual link, so you can give that surreptitious wink if you are being held hostage while you sign your will. And finally, changes to the Privacy Act, another area that received a lot of questions around this ability to stretch it out to 6 months on the last claim. Can I just highlight, because this was a question I asked, it's the last claim relating to one incident. So if there's an incident where someone puts in a claim that a decision was made with the wrong information and something was released publicly that shouldn't have been, and maybe something else, it's the last of those claims that earns the 6 months. But if you then put in a different claim about a different incident or a different department, that will be treated separately. With that, I commend the bill to the House.
Jamie Arbuckle.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to support the Statutes Amendment Bill. As we've heard, it's minor technical amendments. From New Zealand First's point of view, they're common sense changes that cover over 41 different acts, and they must be by consensus. And on that, I commend the bill to the House.
The next call is a split call.
Speaker.
Tuake
anau ki te reo Māori e nei, kōrero tuake anau ki te whakapua ki ngā whakaro o te Pāti Māori mo te pire e kia nei, e kōrero tia nei wānanga hia nei e te whare. Nō reira pēnei anō kāre mo te tā rua tā toru nei ngā kōrero tēnā o tēnā. Engari, tāku I te ata nei kia kaua e nei tuāhuatanga ki te reo Māori, nā runga anō I te whaipanga o te reo Māori ki tēnei whare. Kua rongo tātou, kaore he tino a mai tanga o e nei, o te whakakaohanga mai o ngā pire whātikau mātahi nei. Tika tonu, kia whakatika hia ngā mea kua roe tārewa ana. Ngā mea tārewa ana tēnā koe tōri tō kapo whakāhua, ka nui te mihi. Hoi anō ngā mea tārewa ana, taku rua tau noho nei ki te whare nei, tērā etahi ture, kua roa e tārewa nei te whakatika, te whakahou rā nei e hāngai pū ki ngā mahi o te rangi nei. Nō reire, tautoko ana mātou I era tuāhuatanga katoa, tai atu ki te kupu whakataunaki, te ki taurangi o te whare, ana me ana ko te oath I roto I te reo Pākehā. E rā tikanga te kia whakaihia te tuku o te oath mārunga I te ipurangi, I te hui topa rānei, e tika ana. E tika ana, kei te 2,205 tātou I nāia nei, e tika ana kia āhei te tangata te tuku I ana whakaaro, oti rā te whakatairanga I ana e ki taurangi ai I roto I te oath. Me tā mātou e āpiti nei ki ngā whakatika hanga, ngā whakaaro nui mo te oath nei, tika tonu kia uru ko te tiriti o Waitangi ki roto I te ki taurangi o tēnei whare. Nā runga anō I te ko tuituitanga o te kingi o Ingarangi ki tāte taha iwi Māori e noho nei I raro I te taumaru o tēnei whare. Ana, whakakutahi hia ua whakaaro katoa ki te tiriti o Waitangi, koia tonu ko te tuāpapa e noho nei I raro iho I te tūnga o tēnei whare. Nō reira, ko tā mātou me whai wāhi te tiriti o Waitangi I roto I te ki taurangi o tēnei whare. Puta noa I ngā pāti katoa e whai wāhi ai te mana o te tiriti o Waitangi I roto anō I ngā kauenga katoa. Nō reira, huri noa tātou, tēnā tātou, kia ora tātou.
Te mange o te whare, tēnā koe. I rise to support at the second reading the Statutes Amendment Bill. It was a pleasure to be on the Governance and Administration Select Committee, ably chaired by Rachel Boyack and then Camilla Bellish. We were consulted as a party in 2023 because the amendments need to be minor and non-controversial, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for a good process, some quite incisive questioning when the submitters came in. Some of it is about modernisation. My colleague, Dr. Shunan, picked up on the airmen to aviators. There's also the removal of imbeciles, which is probably a good thing, particularly in this House. Secondly, we have a huge amount of work here. Yes, the elected members work well, yes, the committee staff work well, but my biggest thank you is to the staff who looked through all these, collected them all up, tried to marry the language so that we don't have inconsistencies in our legislation. That either means people don't understand what the law is or exposes people to lengthy court processes. So thank you for that. I'd also like to thank the submitters. Most of them were very much on one or two out of those 42 reduced 41 acts. And the Minister mentioned the New Zealand Amateur Sport Association earlier on. I'd just like to say, in the work that proceeds after this, it seems very important that it's not about what the incorporated society does if we're looking to make things a little simpler in the future. There are plenty of small conservation societies or other special interest societies that would feel very much the same as amateur sport. So I think it's very important that it's about how a society works, how its officers are held accountable, how we know that they've actually put the money where they said they were going to put the money, that the members voting for something actually are members. All of those issues should not be dismissed as too difficult for a small society. There were some helpful and detailed matters raised. The other modernisation, as well as some of the language of imbeciles and aviators. What a wonderful combination. It sounds like it could be a good bar name, really, imbeciles and aviators. Is in the issue about addresses and where you have to do address verification. And we actually heard quite strongly that some of the organisations that have to do address verification these days, and this goes along with the whole difficulties of postal voting for local government, address verification is considerably more time-consuming and difficult, perhaps, than it used to be. Also, we have minor changes to Local Government Act, including putting all of the annual report requirements into one place. And I would just say that reminds us how much reporting local government already does. And I urge parties that were not on the Governance and Administration Select Committee to actually note how this process has worked well, how the staff present a whole list of things, consult early with the parties, bring it to the public in case there's something we've overlooked, and decide we're going to do it like this or we're going to proceed, request that Parliament follows up on some other matters. Thank you. The Greens support.
Honourable Melissa Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be very short. 96 proposals with which amends 42 acts administered by 14 government agencies.
Sorry, it's just a moment. Sorry, was there a point of order?
No, it's late.
Oh.
No, it's not.
No. Oh, can you show me? Yeah, because I've just come to the seat. So, sorry, can we start the members' time again while we just sort this out? Thank you.
Can I?
Yes, you can take your call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill contains 96 proposals which amends 42 acts administered by 14 government agencies. All of this Parliament supports the Statutes Amendment Bill, but I just want to mention one particular thing. Amendment to Criminal Records Clean Slate Act of 2004 basically has derogatory terminology about women, and it actually says subnormal woman or girl, and that is being changed to certain persons. I think that is a good thing, and I commend this bill to the House.
Camilla Bellich.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Pleasure to take a call on this. This is an important bill for Parliament because it changes minor things that would otherwise possibly not be politically the focus of ministers bringing changes to the House. So this bill changes, I think, 41 now, particular bills, so that's what the legislative statement says anyway, and it makes minor changes, and I just wanted to focus on a couple of those because obviously wouldn't have time to go through all 41 changes, but the one that I wanted to start with was just the oaths and declarations changes. This change was put forward as a way of modernising the way that oaths and declarations are undertaken and allowing those to be done kind of by Zoom or by whatever medium you want to use, FaceTime. And the key change that the committee made here from what was originally proposed was actually to make sure that that was an audio-visual link and not an audio link. I recall my time as a junior lawyer, and one of the major jobs that you would do is if anyone wanted to do an oath or a declaration or an affidavit, even if it was a substantive affidavit, it was your duty as a lawyer to go through that affidavit and make sure that the person took their oath and signed all of the exhibits, and it was extremely time consuming, but something that I think when you've finished your professionals course and when you've just newly qualified, you do take extremely seriously, and I think that it's important that all lawyers, when they are, all people, not just lawyers, who are able to take oaths and declarations do take that really seriously. The concern that we had around the audio only was really that when you are required to take an oath from someone in person, that you want to make sure that that person is doing so genuinely in good faith without coercion. And so for us, it made sense to modernise it in terms of accessibility, people who are in remote locations, people who may be ill, emergency situations like we had in COVID, to allow the audio-visual change. But the audio on its own seemed a step too far, to be able to not see the context of where that person was, to not be able to read their body language, to make sure that they were indeed taking that oath or declaration with sound mind, and also without fear of interference or coercion. So I think that was a good change that the committee made, and I want to thank the members of the Governance and Administration Committee. As you'll see from the report, I was involved for a part of this, but also want to acknowledge Rachel Boyack, who was the chair of that committee at the beginning of this process. Although I do note that this particular bill has had a genesis in actually the previous Parliament as well. So both governments have participated in this bill, and actually it's taken this long to get these changes before the House, and that might be something that we can reflect on in terms of making these changes more quickly, because they are minor changes. The other thing that's really unusual about this bill is it requires agreement from every single member of the House. So if there was a single member in this House who disagreed with a particular provision in this bill, that provision would need to be removed, otherwise this bill could not proceed. And I think that is it's great that we have some bills like that, where each individual member, especially when we do have a Parliament which is probably has more party discipline than many other common Westminster systems, that we do have a system where any member of Parliament can look through this, and if they haven't done so, I encourage you to make sure you are happy with these changes, because these are going forward as they are only small changes, and they are going forward in your name, essentially, not just in your party's name. This is something that each individual member has the authority to have a view on. And with that in mind, it was something that I know the Governance and Administration Committee, and I want to acknowledge the staff of that committee, who really were the ones who shepherded this bill through the select committee stage. They made sure that the communication, and the elected members made sure that this was happening, but it was the staff who actually undertook a lot of the consultation to make sure that other parties who weren't represented on the Governance and Administration Committee also had the ability to see what was going through and have a view on that, and to make sure that they were all happy with that. So I think there was New Zealand, who is not on it's the Māori Party and Act. Obviously we have Andy Foster, who is very actively involved from New Zealand First on the Governance and Administration Committee. But it does go through a number of different provisions. We did have submissions from some members of the public who would have liked the bill to go further and to do more substantive changes. Obviously that's not the purview of a statutes amendment bill. It needs to be smaller changes that are not substantive policy. But I think it's always helpful, and I am encouraged by members of the public who did want to make those submissions. You'll see that in particular in relation to incorporated societies, those submissions became a part of our report, and so that submitter has not, although their changes have not been incorporated, their views have been represented in this second reading report to the House, so that time has not been wasted, and it's been raised in a really constructive way, I think, by the committee to be able to look at moving forward. So, Madam Speaker, I won't use all of my time on this, as this is not something which is by its nature political. It's something that we do in this House because we take our responsibility as legislators seriously, and we want to make sure that the acts that govern our country have pragmatic and updated changes from time to time. So I want to thank everyone who's been involved in putting this together over two governments, probably many different select committee members, and the select committee staff who have worked on this, and also the people at government departments who have suggested changes for the Statutes Amendment Bill. It's, I think, in a good state at the moment. Obviously we'll be interested to look at it a bit further in subsequent committee stage and third reading, but I think at this stage it's something that we can all be proud of, that we have put together, and will hopefully make the wheels of the country turn a little bit faster. So I commend it to the House.
Thank you. Just before I take the next call, I just wanted to clarify, so the speeches are in order. When an Act Minister takes the Minister's call, then National takes call 4. So everything is flowing as it should be. So just to clarify that, there's a change in order when a New Zealand First or an Act Minister actually are in charge of the bill. So thank you. I call Dr. Hamish Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the Statutes Amendment Bill. We've heard a lot in this debate about that. This is a vehicle for these minor technical and relatively non-controversial changes to these Acts of Parliament. Some of these pieces of legislation have been on the books from the 50s and 60s and really do need to be modernised. I think for one example was the Housing Act from 1955. It talks about a £1 fee for an easement certificate. So I think these just show some of the reasons why we need to every now and again put these sort of bills through Parliament. It is to make life a lot easier. It does modernise it. So therefore I commend this bill to the House.
Honourable Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know if we're still the fastest lawmakers in the West, but the way this government's been pushing large amounts of legislation through the Parliament with scant regard for the basic principles of the democratic process, that there should be space in lawmaking for select committees to do their work properly, to give members of the public and experts a chance to have their say on bills, has been worrying. And bills like this are a very important way that the Parliament can not only modernise and update the minutiae of our statutes over time, but also to clean up some of the messes that are caused by over hasty lawmaking. Things like the regulatory systems amendments that we put through from time to time, and certainly the statutes amendment bills like this, are a very important way of cleaning house and making sure that we're constantly kind of updating and improving the law so that it can better serve New Zealanders. So Labor's supporting this giant compendium of often very minor and arcane amendments to 42 different acts. And I won't take any more time of the House, but wish this bill well as it makes its way through the chamber.
Madam Speaker. Vanessa Wenig.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in support of the Statutes Amendment Bill in this first reading. This is an omnibus bill that amends a whole raft of minor amendments that are agreed upon across the House, and I commend the bill to the House.
Rosina Lydia Sosini.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to take a call on the Statutes Amendment Bill, and as I've heard my colleagues on this side of the House, we will be supporting this bill. As we've also heard, it's essential tidy up, by definition, not substantive amendments across 42 acts, because it's good regulatory stewardship. It's been very helpful listening when we were in the Governance and Administration Committee, Madam Speaker. I do want to thank the officials for their tremendous work in terms of when they were shepherding this, and also to the public submissions to help committee members understand. Particularly, I will just talk a little bit about the oaths and declarations. In a previous role, I did a number of citizenship ceremonies. It was really important when people are taking oath, and there's a bit of a challenge when you're doing that online. Government members and members of the Select Committee, we asked a number of questions through the public submission process. It was really helpful to understand the do's and don'ts, and particularly around the risks. And so we had very good information and important information that the public officials raised at that time. Also, I wanted to thank the submitters who were able to be part of the process, because it's important, the scenarios around Aotearoa, that we understand as committee members what is relevant, what needs to be raised as risk, particularly in those provisions and proposal. I won't take all of my time. Labor supports this bill. I commend this bill to the House.
Dan Bidwell.
Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to be the last speaker and round off the debate in the Statutes Amendment Bill second reading. The government whip often says dull but worthy speeches, and I think that this is a bill that is characterised as dull but worthy. There's lots of small changes in this bill, and I can see the unanimous support in the House Thank you to the officials. Thank you to the Select Committee. I commend this bill in the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Statutes Amendment Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for committee stage next sitting day. I call on Government Orders of the Day number 6 and 7.
Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill, committee stage. Regulatory Systems Primary Industries Amendment Bill, committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of those bills.
Hey, how are you?
Members, the House is in committee on the Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill and the Regulatory Systems Primary Industries Amendment Bill. We come first to the Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill and to Part 1. This is the debate on clauses 3 to 7, amendments to the Disputes Tribunal Act 1998 and Schedule 1. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Very good morning, members. Great to be here and to be discussing this important Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill. In summary, the changes that are being effected by this government are increasing the financial threshold from 30,000 to 60,000 and a number of other aspects in regards to that. The primary purpose of these changes is to improve access to quick and low cost disputes resolution so that people can resolve those disputes and those claims as fast as practicable. The assessment in terms of the range that has been set was considered by an independent group and has informed the setting of where that threshold is. It is the view of the government that this is an appropriate level in which to maximise the benefit from that. So with that, very much welcome questions from the floor.
Honourable Dr Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we are generally supportive, we're absolutely supportive of increasing the jurisdiction of the Disputes Tribunal to $60,000 and a shout out to all those hard-working Disputes Tribunals referees who resolve numerous civil disputes. And I guess my questions really revolve around missed opportunities and also safeguards, I suppose, because $60,000 is a lot of money, in short. And one of the challenges here is, and it was raised with the Minister relatively informally and discussed at committee, but to no avail. One of the challenges is that Disputes Tribunals referees are often lawyers, but are not required to be lawyers. In fact, the legislation itself refers to a suitable qualification such as law, medicine or dispute resolution, or words to that effect, and I've always found that to be a little odd. And I guess one of my questions to the Minister is whether it was considered appropriate to have people not qualified in law making legal decisions that in fact significantly affect people's property rights and wealth, and because $30,000 is a lot of money for many people. And in fact, if you think of the lowest income New Zealanders, those on perhaps job seeker benefits, it's pretty much the whole lot. And I'm a little concerned that we're increasing the powers of the Disputes Tribunal, which is appropriate, but not increasing the safeguards in a commensurate manner. So the first one is the qualifications of Disputes Tribunal referees. Should we have Disputes Tribunal referees who are not legally qualified determining disputes which, are $60,000. That's an annual income. That's a decent annual income for some people. It's a really genuine question. The second question, in that section 7 of the Act, deals with qualifications. The second question is this, and I've got an amendment paper on the table in this regard. It's around the fact that disputes in the Disputes Tribunal are resolved with regard to the law, but not on the basis of the law. That is to say, a Disputes Tribunal referee, you've got this dispute around, say, a car or just a dispute around a car, although that would go to the Motor Vehicle Disputes Tribunal, so I can't use that one. A dispute around a boat worth $60,000, and the Disputes Tribunal referee can look at the law and say, well, I know the law of misrepresentation and I know the law of contractual mistake. I've taken it all into account, but I've decided in this case not to apply it. So you lose. Now, that's what the legislation says. You look at the law, you think, does that lead to the result I think's fair? Now, we can't, when you're getting into this space, you can't have people, you can't have referees applying their own views of fairness. We need Parliament's view of fairness, which is called the law. On the table we have an amendment that says when you get over $30,000, that doesn't apply. Your sense of fairness doesn't apply, the law applies. And I think that's a really useful change to make it clear that that the law of New Zealand is the base moral code in civil disputes, not the reckons, however informed they may be, of our good disputes tribunal referees. So there's 2 points perhaps to start.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, thank you very much to the member for the question. And I think the point that's being raised in the context are the referees qualified to make decisions in regards to the higher value of which the thresholds have been adjusted for. I mean, it is very much the view of the government that the existing appointment criteria that is in play is sufficient for requiring those suitable candidates to ensure that they are appointed as referees. It also maintains the flexibility. To be specific around the number of individuals that we are talking about, we're talking around 62 individuals that fulfil these roles. Of those, approximately 58 are lawyers and have the qualifications of that context, and the remaining 4 in the main have greater than 10 years experience in this area. So it is the assessment of the status quo that seems to be appropriate in the context of the personal attributes, knowledge and experience of those referees, and on that basis we are comfortable with where it's at.
Dr. Lawrence Yunnan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the Minister for responding to that question. But I think the question that Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb is raising is a really good one, and the Green Party does support his amendment on this bill, and particularly the one around the new clause 7B, new section 18(6)A of Principal Act. And I think that's a really important safeguard for what this bill is trying to achieve. And I just want to check with the Minister in terms of what we're seeing in the regulatory impact statement around the policy intent of this bill, but I want to specifically focus on with regards to what we see in Part 1, which has multiple sections around increasing the threshold from 30,000 to 60,000. But part of the reason for this is so that way we are able to ease some of the burdens around the function and some of the issues that we're seeing in terms of district court. But again, like what the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb mentioned, that this dispute tribunal does fulfill a very different role in comparison. But what we're also seeing here is, in terms of the limitations and constraint as expressed in the regulatory impact statement, the scale of the problem is unknown. in terms of the increase from threshold from, let's say, 30,000 to even up to 100,000. So I guess my first question to the Minister is, if the scale of problem is unknown, what sort of expectations would the Minister have, maybe via the officials, of that this is something that is genuinely going to serve the purpose as intended by this legislation of increasing that threshold from 30 to 60,000? That's my first question. And I also wanted to check with the Minister that, you know, as part of, again, the regulatory impact statement, has other things been considered and have been ruled out as a result of this as well?
Vanushi Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions of the Minister, because I, of course, do agree with moves that are taken to ensure greater access to justice, which I think is a good thing. My first question is a bit of a general one, and it's in relation to the Law Society submission, which talked about the value of increasing access to justice. However, their view was that it doesn't set aside the need for a more comprehensive review of access to tribunals, and the Disputes Tribunal in particular, they made a number of proposals for change. Their suggestion was that there was a need for a first principles assessment of the tribunal, and so the first question is a general one about whether that was considered at any stage. The second question is in regards to the threshold itself. So obviously colleagues have spoken to the needs for safeguards as we increase the threshold, but when the Rules Committee was considering improving access to civil justice, their report suggested an increase to 70,000. And I wonder whether that was based on data in regards to the abandonment of a portion of the value of a claim, or whether the data demonstrates that actually that abandonment portion really fell up to the 60,000 threshold, which was the basis for going with 60,000. And then also in relation to the Law Society's submission, they noted that there was an issue in terms of narrow or appeal grounds, and that the Rules Committee proposal had suggested both an increased threshold, but also that there was potentially a need for an appeal right to exist as well. And whether that was something that the Minister had considered, even if it was a limited appeal right of some regard. And then my last question for now is in relation to Clause 5, which amends Section 14, and that concerns the abandonment of a portion of the value of the claim to bring it in line within the jurisdiction of the Disputes Tribunal, so within the band of the new $30,000 to $60,000. My question is really a monitoring one, and whether there's an intent to review the new abandonment provisions to see whether there's justification to shift the threshold even higher in terms of what I believe the Rules Committee had suggested, either going to 70,000 or to 100,000. Thank you.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to members for those questions. In regards to the questions regarding Clause 5 by the member, and also broader questions in regards to increasing the financial the financial threshold higher than the 60, that was considered. However, in the context of the public interest, it was not of the view that the Disputes Tribunal model was appropriate to be hearing higher value cases, and it is appropriate, obviously, in the view of the government, to increase it from 30 to 60, but not beyond that. Points raised in regards to the Rules Committee. Submitters to that Rules Committee as part of the Disputes Tribunal model, noted that it may not have suited to hear higher value claims where parties would benefit from a right to appeal and legal representation. So in that context, I believe that answers. There was other questions initially from Dr. Lawrence Yunan in regards to threshold changes. I provided that overview in my opening statements in regards to why we have moved from 30 to 60 in regards to efficiency. So that covers off those questions.
Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think the Minister's yet addressed my question relating to section 18, in respect to which there is an amendment paper on the table. So, and I've just grabbed a copy of the bill. Section 18.6 says, the Tribunal shall determine the dispute according to the substantial merits and justice of the case, and in doing so shall have regard to the law, but shall not be bound to give effect to strict legal rights or obligations or legal forms or technicalities. Now, my view is that once you're getting into this kind of number, the legal rights and obligations are pretty handy, and we should be actually applying them. And I have no doubt that 95% plus, maybe 99% of the time, that's exactly what tribunal referees do. But I don't think we should have a forum where you can just say, I reckon that the substantial merits and justice of the case are this, because the substantial justice and merits of the case are what the law says it is, not what a dispute tribunal referee thinks it is. So I'd appreciate the Minister's response, whether he thinks you should be able to decide civil disputes for up to $60,000 on a basis other than the law. And my next point actually flows from that, and that's appeal rights. Because once again, when we had, the small claims tribunal started off for $500 disputes, and it was a quick fire, no appeal dispute resolution, and that was fine at that level. But now we've got up to this level, we've got a question about what appeals are allowed. Section 50 of the Act deals with appeals, and the only ground of appeal is that the proceeding was conducted by the referee in a manner that was unfair to the appellant. Now that's a way of saying a breach of natural justice, that there has been, not the decision is unfair, not the legal conclusions are unfair, not the factual findings are unfair, but the proceedings were conducted. The way in which, so classic example, the respondent rings up and says, I've had a car crash, I can't make it on time. The referee doesn't adjourn it, proceeds without hearing from them and decides against them. Didn't get a fair hearing. Classic example of being preceded unfair. Good ground of appeal. What about if they get the law wildly wrong? What about if they say, I've had a look at the law of misrepresentation and I think it says this and therefore you lose, and they just got it wildly wrong. Classic error of law. It's not, as long as they have regard to the law, it doesn't matter if they get it right or wrong, on this section, as long as they look at the law and go, I'm going to look at the law of misrepresentation, an error of law is not a basis for an appeal. Even though it says the referee, because what subsection 2 of section 50 says is the referee fails to have regard to any provision of any enactment that is brought to their attention. So you can have a regard to it, think it, entirely misconstrue it, but it's not a ground of appeal. Now, I'll tell you what, if I had a referee who just had a bad day and got the law wildly wrong and then said, and so you owe that fellow $60,000, I think I should have a right of appeal to someone who's is able to correct that error. Now, findings of fact are different. I've listened to you both. I believe you and not you. That's a finding of fact. I can accept that you can't appeal on those things, or as a much higher threshold for appeal, because findings of fact are always going to have an element of the first instance decision maker having a better opportunity. But making a gross error of law, turning your mind to it and getting it wrong, should be a grounds of appeal. So that's what my amendment paper deals with, which provides that for claims over $30,000, an error of law should be a ground for appeal. Now, if the Minister would like to stand up and say no, even though they make an error of law and get the law wildly wrong, I think it's okay for someone to get a windfall of $60,000 and the other person to lose out entirely unjustly and at variance with the law to the tune of $60,000. I'd be interested to hear that, but I'd much prefer him to say he'd support my amendment paper.
Dr. Lawrence Yunnan.
Chair. Thank you, Minister, for his response to my questions, and I also do think that the previous speaker raised some really important questions because the threshold is not, yes, the Minister has mentioned it, but the threshold, as noted, is not a small amount, and we see in the regulatory impact statement it's quite a substantial increase from recent years, and actually since the history of the threshold for the district tribunal. One of the things that the Minister mentioned, and I just want to pick up on what the Minister said before, is in terms of the threshold has been set at $60,000 in terms of also, I think the Minister mentioned public interest. And I really want to get the Minister's, I guess, thoughts around what we see in the regulatory impact statement for paragraph 55 to 57, which is that there is what would be the, I guess, the negative implications of increasing that threshold in terms of the public's confidence in the disputes tribunal and also the impact to natural justice. As we heard from the previous speaker, Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb, that this may, because of the significant increasing amount, may have implications around natural justice if the error of law and misrepresentation is not considered thoroughly, which then will have the adverse effect of eroding public confidence around this. So it would be really good to hear from the Minister on that in combination with what we're seeing as reported in the regulatory impact statement. Now, another thing I would like to pick up on is Schedule 1, which is sections attached to Section 7, Part 1 of the bill. And one of the things around Schedule 1, Part 3, provisions relating to Disputes Tribunal Amendment Act 2024, Section 3, subsection 2. Noting that there might be conversations later on around the commencement date, but the commencement date is set to be 3 months after the royal assent. But subsection 2 says if the claim has not been disposed before the commencement date, the person may not, on or after the commencement date, amend or withdraw the case. I wanted to check with the Minister. So basically this allows people a 3-month period where you may get people withdrawing their case, which is currently with a threshold of $30,000, and reapply to $60,000 or up to $60,000. Is there an anticipation by the Minister and by the officials of the, I guess, the extent that this may happen? So that would be my second question to the Minister on Schedule 1.
Thanks again for members for those questions. Just in response specifically to Clause 3.2, I mean, primarily the change there is to stop someone from, in effect, amending a claim during the process in order to allow them to take benefit from the changes that are going. So it means that claims that are already in play need to continue under that model. So that's the response around 3.2. In regards to the points raised by the Honourable Duncan Webb in regards to decision-making mandate, appeal rights and other components. At a fundamental level, the decisions that are made are obviously a core aspect of the model in which is being implemented and intended in terms of the principles around fairness, common sense and efficient decision making. Now, the referees in this case are required to make decisions in accordance with the substantial merits and justice of the case while also having regard to the law, as opposed to having to administer the law and give effect to strict legal rights and or obligations. And so therefore, by making any changes that could risk undermining the tribunal's access to justice benefits, such as timely resolution, or finality of the decision, then that is the reason, that context. Why are the appeal rights limited? The primary consideration there is that limited appeal rights in the principle provide finality for the parties. However, there are mechanisms. You use an example of coming in bad day. How would that play through? Well, appeals from the Disputes Tribunal to the District Court are obviously play. There are judicial review by the High Court also, but in an instance of an individual such as the case, the party to a claim or a person who is party to a claim who is unhappy with the outcome, they are able to apply for one rehearing. And so I think in the context of the issues raised, practically that's the process through. The other aspect, we do not support the amendment on the table in regards to clause 7B. To be honest, I'll cut to the chase 7A and C9 as well. But in regards to 7B specifically, we don't for the reasons outlined. The counterfactual to Dr. Lawrence Yunan's point around access to justice. Well, the reality is that by not increasing the threshold for 30 to 60, the assessment is that there is potentially about 2,000 claims that would not have access to justice. And so the benefit of increasing the threshold means that more New Zealanders have access to justice, and the counterfactual of not increasing it means that those people would not. And I think, irrespective of position, more people having access to low and affordable cost justice is a position that we want to be in.
Honourable Dr Duncan Webb's tabled amendment inserting new section 50A is ruled out of order as being outside the scope of the bill. Honourable Dr Duncan Webb's tabled amendment inserting new subsection 6A in section 18 is ruled out of order as being outside the scope of the bill. The question is that part 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to part 2, and part 2 is the debate on clauses 8 to 10, amendments to other enactments, and Schedule 2. The question is that part 2 stand part. Honourable Dr Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand that part 2 amends the Disputes Tribunal rules. And I must say I was very surprised to have those amendments ruled out of order, because they all dealt with situations where the limit had been increased. And in fact, my other amendment deals with the Dispute Tribunal rules and in particular the fees. So what we have is an amendment which inserts a new fee, a fee of $468, a filing fee, in respect of which, in order of the tribunal sort of the claim is $30,000 and one or more. The filing fee in the district court, which can be waived, is $260. The filing fee, and this is an access to justice point. If I've got a claim, someone has caused me damage in some way of $35,000, but I don't have $468 to file, I don't get to go to the Disputes Tribunal. Poor people don't have $468 in spare cash to pursue people who cause them harm. And so my amendment paper is to say that where there is a claim over $30,000, the Disputes Tribunal referee, a Disputes Tribunal referee, has the power to waive that application fee. And it may be that it should be in whole or part, but at any event, you can imagine if you've been defrauded, scammed out of your savings, and you find the scammer, and you want to try and get it back, but crikey, your bank account's been cleaned out, you haven't got $468, and you're not going to get it from instant finance. So my view is that if you're going to have genuine access to justice, and arguably this is all about access to justice, you need to be able to say, in this case, this fee is waived. Now, I know that there's a power on a new power on a dispute tribunal referee to order that the filing fee be repaid if you win, but that's not the same. This is about getting into the tribunal, not getting a award coming out of the tribunal. So it's really important that we recognise that. And it's not good enough to say, well, if you win, you get your fee back, because you're never going to get there. You're not even going to get to ask the question unless the tribunal says, all right. It's hard enough for many people to get the wherewithal to do that. Well, it's a pretty legalistic process. I totally appreciate that it's a low form, nothing like the district court or high court, but for many people this will be the first interaction they have with the justice system. They've got to do all the form filling and come up with $468. And the idea that you can waive a district court fee for $260 but not a disputes tribunal fee for $468, frankly, is a nonsense. It's absolutely beggars belief. And again, this was raised at Select Committee, and what wasn't something that I was able to persuade members to make a change. But now that we're here in the House and the Minister is there, and I know he's a thoughtful Minister and a Minister who wants to see people have access to justice and doesn't want to see people who don't have $468 precluded from bringing their claims, maybe he'll be able to accept that. And of course, if he wants to go and improve the drafting, I'd be happy for us to report progress on this bill so that could be done as well. I think we should take our time rather than rushing through it. But it is a serious point, and it's a real one, because there'll be plenty of people who don't have that money and will be denied justice. So I'd be interested in his response to that.
Dr. Lawrence Yunnan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just to add on to that, one other thing that has been discussed with officials as part of the committee stage was this was simple. The fee setting of $468, as we see here in Clause 9, is a simple extrapolation of the doubling of the baseline amount of $30,000, $60,000. The assumption that was made with no evidential basis, as we saw during the Select Committee, is that people with $30,000 of claim will have $234 to be able to file as a filing fee. Ergo, people who have up to $60,000 will be able to pay for that. But I think the other consideration there that needs to be also mentioned is it's not simply that is a scale from $30,000 to $60,000. That is, if your claim is $30,001, you see a doubling of filing fee as opposed to a progression. So I just want to also check with the Minister in terms of the rationale for something like that. Why was there only one band that was considered, which is doubling of the fee, but not, I guess, a progression or a proportionality if you're looking at within, let's say, even dollar or within $100 or $1,000 brackets as a result. I think that does further, as what the previous speaker said, further limit people's ability to access justice. I want to raise another point on top of this, and one of the things is in terms of what we see in the regulatory impact statement, the final page around cost breakdown. Now, the cost breakdown here is also based on the estimation of the $60,000 increase, including the total estimated filing fee revenue that has mentioned. But as Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb mentioned, that if people have to essentially take a leap of faith and put down the filing fee, or potentially there's an option for them to have the filing fee deducted if they won a particular case in the tribunal, is the estimate filing fee revenue that is on page 34 of the regulatory impact statement correct, or are we also anticipating that we will not get to that amount either because this won't have the projected benefit and revenue generation opportunity because not that many people will have that amount of money to file, or there will be a greater reduction because people will not be able to pay for those sort of filing fee, which then just generated as a potential debt. So those are two, I guess, one question further on from what the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb mentioned, and the second question around the estimated filing fee revenue in the regulatory impact statement.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. I think both questions are really focusing on the point around will the higher filing fee be a barrier to access in the context of individuals in which noted. So first and foremost, the reality as the government sees it is that it is appropriate for users of the tribunal to pay a fee in order to recover the costs of running that tribunal. And that is because actually a $30,000 or up to $60,000 investment does provide significant private benefit in using that tribunal to resolve a dispute. It is also a significantly more efficient mechanism in order to bring proceedings than, say, through the district court process due to other aspects which are obvious, but particularly around court fees, etc. I think the point in reference to particular individuals who are in a financial sense going to find that threshold is above their means to, from an affordability point of view, is that separately the government is considering a proposal that is progressing through the Regulatory Systems Tribunal's Amendment Bill, which will enable referees in order for a response, or basically enable referees to put in place that the respondent pay the cost of the filing fee back to the party who is a successful applicant. And so that mechanism in order to ensure that that repayment is made is something that has been considering as part of that process. And that will ensure, I think, to the points raised in some contexts, that the costs do not fall on those that have been wronged and will remove a further barrier to accessing justice. So in our view, in my view, that covers questions clause 9.2d and the points raised by the two members.
The question is that Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb's tabled amendment to clause 9 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for. Clerk, please conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te Marima Ngā Poti Whaka-ai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes for.
Oh, could we just ask that New Zealand First please resubmit their vote, please? The clerk's just got a question.
8 votes for. In favour.
In favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
E rima Ngā Poti Whaka-ai.
This is the amendment paper.
Yeah.
Opposed. We are opposed. We are opposed, yeah. Yeah, we're right. Yes.
The ayes are 62. Oh.
Seek your favour, yes.
Okay, I haven't called the vote
opposed.
yet, so I'll ask the member to make the vote again. Thank you. It's for New Zealand First member. Thank you.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed. Thank you, Chair.
We'll have quiet during voting, please. The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. And can I just make a comment that many times votes have been changed in this House, so individual members who are new should not feel that they are isolated. And so now we have the question is that Part 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Schedule 2. The question is that the Minister's amendment to Schedule 2 set out on AP number 259 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Schedule 2 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we come to our final debate, clauses 1 and 2. This is the debate on title and commencement. The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that clause 2 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill with amendment presently. Now then we go on to the next. So we are now on to the... Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Just one moment. There we go. Thank you. Members, so now the House is in committee on the Regulatory Systems Primary Industries Amendment Bill, and I'll just give the Minister a moment to come into the chair, and we start with the debate on Part 1, and Part 1 is the debate on clauses 3 to 25, amendments to Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Act 1997, and secondary legislation, and Part 1 of Schedule 4. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Joe Luxton. Oh, sorry, point of order. Dana Kirkpatrick.
Just seeking a piece of paper. Madam Chair, I seek leave for all provisions to be taken as one question.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? Yes, there is. Honourable Joe Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And given that there are many changes to this piece of legislation, albeit some minor and technical, we do think it's a good idea to traverse and ask some of the questions of the Minister, particularly for those people at home who will be completely glued to their televisions, wanting to know what we are doing in this space. So my first question to the Minister is with regard to Part 1, Section 2. 2A, B, C, D, where it says the Governor-General may from time to time, by order in council for the purposes of this Act, declare any mixture of substances or biological compound to be an agricultural compound, or, and then it goes on to C, where it says declare any entity to be a pest, or declare any entity not to be a pest. So my first question is, what criteria will be used to determine whether an entity is or is not a pest, or was once a pest but no longer, or was never a pest but is going to be a pest? The other question I have for the Minister is with regard to 4A, where we mean Section 9, under application for registration, where it states subsection 1B does not apply to a substance, mixture of substances, or a biological compound that is exempt from registration as an agricultural compound under Section 8A for a limited period of time. So can the Minister describe for the House or those watching at home under what circumstances or why a substance, mixture of substances or biological compound may be exempt from being registered as an agricultural compound? And if it's not an agricultural compound by reason of the exemption, what might a substance or mixture of substances or biological compound be classified as instead?
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
I know I'm hiding here in this chair. Thank you to the chair. Yes, my question's also around this part around clause 4 and section 2, which is the interpretation section. And I'm particularly interested in if the Minister can help us by giving some examples of what the newly defined agricultural compounds would be that are involved with mitigating adverse impacts on the environment or mitigating emissions that contribute to climate change. So my apologies, I don't have the principal legislation in front of me, but I'm assuming that what happens with clause 4, section 2 amended and the new 2.1 is just that now agricultural compounds, there will be a type of agricultural compound that relates to the mitigation of adverse impacts on the environment and another one on mitigating emissions, but as I'm reading this blind at the moment, but if the Minister could give some examples and explain why it is that they should be within this agricultural compounds and veterinary medicines regime, I think that would be helpful.
Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Look, thank you very much. Again, on part 1 and the issue of inhibitors, which is a new area of science and of products that many people across agriculture are looking to for, they might see them as magic bullets, but they certainly see them as part of the progress in terms of reducing emissions from agriculture. And so it is a little bit confusing here. Subpart 3 of part 1 comes into force 12 months after the rest of the bill under subsection 3, and it ends the 1-year transition supporting amendments to include inhibitors under the ACVM Act 1997 and its secondary legislation. Look, understand the complexities, and this really was sparked by, I think it was Bovaer, or it was a compound developed in Europe, mainly for indoor farming systems, but there was talk of it being very useful, and indeed one of the processing companies in New Zealand had approved it in principle, but the process through the ACVM Act had not been completed, and indeed actually the company hadn't applied for it. So the questions I have for the Minister is to, of that particular inhibitor, we know the case study, but how many more others are likely to come through? And indeed, do these changes protect farmers and processing companies and exporters from the risk that we saw in the past from DCD? It ended up being in the supply chain. So these regulations are critical. I think the exemptions in this piece of legislation are designed to, I guess, create some competitive tension and some innovation in the system, but I do need to know, or we should hear from the Minister as to whether we've got the right protections in place to ensure proper scrutiny and that exemptions under registration work positively for farmers in the long term, not just open up a commercial opportunity that puts the whole export sector at risk. So I look forward to that answer.
Honourable Joe Luxton.
Chair, I want to just move on to the renewal of registration piece at the moment. 22A for the Minister. It talks about the decisions to grant an application for renewal or a new registration, and whilst I understand that there would be reasons perhaps why a renewal wouldn't happen, for clarity, though, I want to know, because obviously when you go through the process of renewing a registration, depending on what it is, it can be quite time consuming, and there can also perhaps be a bit of cost to it. So I wanted to ask the Minister under the 22B decision on application for a renewal, where the Director-General may or may not grant an application made under section 22A if the Director-General is satisfied that XYZ, but it does go on to say that if the Director-General is not satisfied that the requirements in subsection 1A or B have been met, then they must refuse to grant the application and the registration will expire. What I would like to know from the Minister is if the criteria or requirements haven't been met, will there or was there consideration given to perhaps allowing someone just a bit of leeway of time to get whatever it might be in order, or does it just get declined and then they have to complete or start the whole process all over again? And is there a cost to that, or would there be a time limit set on whereby they can look to reapply and ensure they've got everything in order? So just for a bit of clarification, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
And hopefully the Minister will answer us on this part one.
I haven't had a chance. You keep asking questions.
Oh, well, I very welcome you to stand up. So I will get this short for you, Minister. But in looking forward to you answering the question about that what I was asking about in terms of the definitions clause, talking about mitigation of adverse effects and mitigating emissions. And we've heard from Damien O'Connor about the inhibitors, and that there's these new sections. So clause 14 has the definition of inhibitor, and then there's some changes to the regulations, I presume, because it's been put in the primary. Oh no, this is a change to the regulations, sorry. That there's a change at clause 14 to the regulations with the phrase inhibitor, which links back to those things that mitigate the adverse effects. So if you can comment on what the change here is doing, that would be lovely.
Honourable Todd.
Madam Chair, thank you. Colleagues, thank you for those questions. And a lot of this I know was transversed or covered during the Select Committee, but important that we bring it here. At a higher level, I'll give the explanations, the assurances that are required, and I apologise if I don't get them in the order that they came out. In as far as I think Joe Luxon was talking about pests, was that you, Joe? Yeah. So the Act does not amend that. It is in the existing Act, so it doesn't make any change at all, just the way that it's listed where the other changes, it keeps pests there. So there is no change to legislation as a result of this bill. The definition of what's a pest and how it's considered and how it's dealt with remains the same as under the existing law, so that doesn't change. Damien O'Connor talked a little bit about some of the inhibitors and proof of safety, and will it have an impact upon exports and so on. Very, very important points. What the legislation does is says in some cases there are products that don't need to be regulated or can't be registered, and this will now allow that to happen. But it doesn't speak to how you register. That's a separate piece of legislation. This is merely recognising that there will be compounds or things that may well be used overseas, or those who want to bring them and use them in New Zealand, they don't have the ability to. For instance, there's not the ability to get permission to have a trial for some of these things, or not the ability to seek registration for new compounds, and he's mentioned inhibitors. But in effect, this means it will be possible to register, but the process to go through to seek registration and proof that they are not harmful in any way to production in New Zealand or elsewhere doesn't change by that Act. That remains elsewhere in other acts. And then finally, in as far as where are we? Section 22A 2B under clause 6 is concerned around the ACVM. The Act does not provide for renewing trade name product registrations that have expired. Instead, applicants are required to undertake the necessary process of completing a new application. The amendment through this bill provides for renewals where registration details are current and the product remains compliant with conditions or approvals of registration, reflecting how MPI is addressing the problem through administration. So ultimately, if the product registration was valid, the information is still there, its authorisation can be renewed without having to go through the whole full process again. I think this is something that keeps the level of protection that is required in all of these areas, because it doesn't alter it. It just actually takes away what is viewed as unnecessary bureaucracy, but doesn't weaken protection under law.
Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Look, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the Minister's response to some of that. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here, but I guess the Minister refers to the secondary process whereby these inhibitors, for example, will have to go through the ACVM. They'll be registered. Farmers will know about them in the pipeline, and as we saw with Bovair, there was a groundswell of demand from the primary sector to get access to these new goods. And I guess it's the question is to the Minister is to give us an assurance that the process of the process of approval will indeed remain robust, because I think it is critical. Then the one other issue around continued registration of a trade name. Things do move forward quite quickly, and so there is an expiry date for a reason, and then just rolling over the registration seems on the face of it to be sound. But the question might be, because New Zealand farmers and horticulturists are very innovative, and they push the boundary sometimes on the use of chemicals in particular. There is a lot of off-the-label use, which I don't want to expose unnecessarily, but to say that once a product is in the system, the temptation to use it off-label, and in a world that is increasingly focusing on residues, we just need to have from the Minister, and I'm sure he probably will, but I think it would be important for him to say that actually the approval process and the monitoring and the re-registration will require a scrutiny of the systems to make sure they're up to date with what is an ever-increasing international level of monitoring.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Honourable Tom McLean.
Madam Chair, I just want to recognise Honourable Damien O'Connor's support of groundswell there. He said there's a groundswell of support. I think he meant he supports groundswell. You got it the wrong way around. So this bill before us doesn't deal with the issues that he mentions. It only says that something is possible. It doesn't say how it will happen, another piece of legislation. But more broadly, his point is a very important one. New Zealand's an export nation. We produce very high quality, safe food the world wants. Our regulatory systems are better than many. In fact, they stand up to scrutiny all over the world. We see from time to time when something may inadvertently get into a supply chain, it is found often by the processor. They take action quickly. They too, as all New Zealanders involved in food production, understand the importance of the rules and regulations that back up the claims that we make overseas. And so this legislation doesn't change that at all. It merely says that there will continue to be evolutions of things that may well be advantageous to farmers and food producers to have in New Zealand. His request about whether or not the system of verification ensuring fit for purpose and won't harm food production in New Zealand, it remains. I would hope across successive governments into the future that remains an absolute priority. I'll give one more example of why I think this is very important. Damien O'Connor is correct that there will be a number of products developed in New Zealand from around the world that farmers may want available to them to help them meet their obligations to reduce emissions. And we shouldn't be in the place where, as an example, in Australia, they have innovative products that help them reduce emission in their dairy herd when they're not available to New Zealand, because it puts us at a disadvantage, it puts up costs, it takes away a tool farmers may use. However, that in Australia they have accepted a product for use in the production of milk is not a reason for us to automatically accept it here in New Zealand. And the reason for that is we have a greater trade consequence if there is an issue than Australia would. And the reason for that is we export the majority of the milk and dairy protein we produce. Australia consumes the majority that they produce. And if there was an adverse effect, it would not have the same impact upon their trade around the world and their access to markets as it would for New Zealand and to the detriment of New Zealand dairy farmers. So I would argue that our regulatory system of looking at new products to become available in New Zealand is to some degree more rigorous. I'm not saying that in Australia it isn't rigorous, but more rigorous than other countries, and it is by necessity because of what we produce in our trade profile. And there are times when the companies want to import it, or the processors or the farmers themselves are frustrated that it takes longer than they would hope it might or think it should, so that they can have a level playing field with, say, Australia or the European Union. But to them I say, I understand, but we work as fast as we can so we can give the assurance, because actually we are a trading nation. And I think the points that Damien O'Connor is making around ensuring that that regulatory system that makes decisions almost to the point of being more cautious than sometimes others would be is not unreasonable for us to expect to be recognised in legislation. But again, this legislation doesn't change that. It merely says that there are compounds that are available and they might want to use New Zealand. They can be registered, but they will have to go through the process of verification through other pieces of legislation. This doesn't alter that. It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it harder. It merely says it is possible for them to be registered.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
To go back to this point about the mitigation of the environment and of emissions, and in relation to inhibitors, is the Minister saying, is the point here, that an application can be made and those are new criteria, being the environment and the reductions of emissions, but there are no changes to the overall regulatory process? That's just what I'm trying to work out, what the hook is.
Sorry, I guess what I was saying is the process isn't weakened, but yes, they are in addition, yes.
The Honourable Jo Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to draw the Minister's attention to new section 76A with regard to the Director General. Number 8, where it says that in addition to complying with the Legislation Act 2019, the Director General must, if the Director General considers it practicable, cause a notice that is secondary legislation to be brought to the attention of persons likely to be affected by the notice or publication in any newspaper or trade journal or by any other practicable means. What is the Minister's thinking with regard to what does it mean if the Director General considers it practicable? What does practicable mean in this particular situation? And what criteria must the Director General use to consider whether it's practicable or not practicable? And the other thing I wanted to ask about, and it might seem a bit silly and a bit strange, but under subsection 10, it says the Director General must notify the persons affected by the notice individually in writing, whether by post or facsimile. Do we still have faxes? I don't know, and I just wanted to check on that as well. It might seem small and trivial, but if we're updating the legislation, we may as well update it properly. Thank you.
Honourable Todd McClay.
Yes, we've found a fax machine. In essence, it describes the ability to provide the information. More broadly elsewhere in government, I think there's a body of work that says how do we most easily update the way that we must communicate things, rather than, if you look in legislation, it prescribes it. And we go back, there are some bits of legislation that say it has to be by telex or registered letter or so on. In the end, I am advised that as long as it is provided to the person, and it can be by written letter or facsimile, which can have a broader implication than that, then it still works within the Act. But you are right, there are not many fax machines left anymore.
The question is that Part 1 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. We now come to the debate on Part 2, which is the debate on clauses 26 to 60, amendments to Animal Products Act 1999 and secondary legislation, and Schedule 1 and Part 2 of Schedule 4. The question is that Part 2 stand part. The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Madam Chair, I mean, for the most part, and I guess Labor supports the legislation across the board, but there are some questions that need to be asked, and particularly in this area. It's not actually about the Animal Products Act themselves or the products. It's actually the sales, distribution and application of these things. And so I have a couple of questions for the Minister, because tied up with the compounds, but actually it comes through the Animal Products Act. That is that veterinarians traditionally were always the sole distributors, and and outlet for most of these animal products. And that, of course, that changed. The door was open to other companies, livestock companies, are able to sell many of these products. So the question I have for the Minister is that in making these changes here, did he consider whether we should take a slightly more precautionary approach and introduce some other guidelines? We have some products that actually can be distributed in bulk to farmers. There are some requirements. However, the monitoring of those application requirements is sometimes a bit loose and a bit vague, and so there are some risks with that. So I guess the question to the Minister is what consideration took place alongside, I guess, the streamlining of these animal products regulations?
Madam Chair, to be honest, I didn't look to the same degree of detail as this as the member just asked, although I did seek assurances that it would achieve the things he has asked about, and that actually in the case of where veterinary medicines are provided maybe in larger form, there isn't additional risk. But actually I think I found a note somewhere from by the time that the legislation was worked up and introduced to the House, where the Minister had absolute assurance that this part of the legislation would work well, and it was signed by the Honourable David O'Connor, who brought the legislation to the House.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you. So we're talking here, the conversation that's just had in part about Schedule 1 of this bill, and so we're the clauses 49 is about categorisation as a primary producer. And then Schedule 1 of this bill introduces new Schedule 1A and operations that categorise person as primary processor. And it's a very interesting schedule for a bill in terms of it talks about avian eggs, deer velvet, we get words like slicing and drying in there, fish onshore processing, and again we talk about the tubing of squid and fish processing at sea. So question, just if the Minister can comment on why it is that these 4 different sets of operations are now categorised as primary processor, and how that will be helpful for those regulations would be useful. Thank you.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Just to follow through, I may have slightly misled in early discussions around animal products, indeed not just being products for farmers, but actually the products that we're exporting. And I guess that my colleague has pointed to areas of finfish, and I guess, if you were to go through the kind of oversight that this piece of legislation is looking to improve, and we accept that the objective is to improve. There are a lot of things in there: compounds, devices, documents, equipment, identification. These are quite complex systems, and they govern our exports. And so ensuring that the Director General's oversight, whose official or whose export and official assurance is required with in terms of export, these are right at the leading edge of the protection of our reputation internationally. And so, again, just seeking an assurance, because I think it's an opportunity for the Minister to promote the objectives of this piece of legislation. But, as we've seen with amendments brought to the Select Committee, 2 different lots of amendments from the Minister, the question of, is this sufficient, or what else are you going to change, or what would you like to change? It is an evolutionary process, not you, Madam Chair, no, you wouldn't change anything, no. But of the Minister, that is that we're in a rapidly changing world. The trade agreements that, we have negotiated require ever ongoing improvements. Are we satisfied, as the House, as a committee, satisfied that the changes here are going to indeed uphold those protections?
Madam Chair.
Honourable Todd McLean.
The answer is yes, I am, and they will. In essence, this is a regulatory settings bill as broad as this one is an opportunity for us to look to update, to take account of these changes. Some of the things that are now required, and as far as giving certainty, particularly when it comes to trade. But I think Honourable Damien O'Connor's point is a valid one, that actually the work that has been done here by the House at the moment doesn't finish with this piece of legislation. It actually is ongoing. From a regulatory point of view, we should always be looking for ways to make things more efficient and more effective, but also to achieve the outcome that we need. As a food-producing nation, it is very important we have a regulatory system that keeps up with evolution and changes and advancements, but also with the protections that we need when it comes to how we produce food and the assurances that we give. And so the changes that he is alluding to do achieve that, but no, I wouldn't want to give the impression that this fixes it and therefore the work should not continue. In as far as the questions around Schedule 1 are concerned, the only change is that rather than these 3 or 4 areas being dealt with through order in council, we now will have the ability to do it in regulation, and so it's making it uniform. All other processes are dealt with regulation. For some anomaly, these are order in council, so we're just actually lining up to making it the same. And that doesn't again change the nature of what we want to achieve. It is making it the same for all processes. It's just a simplification of regulation, so it is done in one way and it becomes uniform and standard, as opposed to having to deal with different processes who have the same obligations or requirements upon them in different regulatory ways.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Question on this, and that is around the amendments, and I have got the principal legislation in front of me as well, and I just can't see why there's a change here, and that is around the definition of animal, which means any member of the animal kingdom and includes any mammal, bird, finfish, shellfish, reptile, amphibian, insect or invertebrate. And then
I'm sorry to interrupt, Member. Can you just say which part or which clause you're referring to?
Oh, sorry, I'm on clause 56.
Thank you.
Which is section 4 amended the interpretation, and it relates back to the Principal Act, the definition of animal, which has this phrase that you can declare a creature or an entity to be an animal for the purpose of this Act, which I think is fascinating in terms of what that creature might be, but I do acknowledge that that is already in the principal legislation. So just wondering why these changes in the bill.
Madam Chair, it is not changing the definition of what an animal is. It's just clarifying what a declaration is. And so this is a declaration, and I think from memory or advice, it takes it from one act and brings it over to this and saying this is what a declaration is, and the definition of what an animal is hasn't changed since the Bible.
Right, thank you.
The question is that Part 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. We now come to debate.
To declare that result.
The ayes have it. We now come to the debate on Part 3, which is the debate on Clause 61, the repeal of Animal Products Ancillary and Transitional Provisions Act 1999. The question is that Part 3 stand part.
I think it would be right for the Minister to briefly touch on why it is that this Act is being repealed. Should he? But she doesn't want to do.
Questions?
The Honourable Todd McLean.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. There are two answers. The first, most straightforward one is the previous government decided it was important to do so, and I accepted that advice when I became the Minister. Right? It hasn't happened often, but since we're all supporting this, I thought it would. The second thing, though, is that we often find pieces of legislation that are redundant. They are usurped by advances or other areas and so on. And so, with other pieces of legislation come in that replace them. So in the case of many parts of this legislation, you should view it, members should view it as a tidying up of the statute books, which creates certainty and is easier for businesses in the private sector to be able to use.
The question is that Part 3 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The The ayes have it. We now come to the debate on part 4. The question is that part 4 stand part. Honourable Jo Luxton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to draw the Minister's attention to section 36, the amended obligations relating to traps. Now, in this country, we hold our heads up high with our high standards to animal welfare, and when we go hunting or trapping, that we do things in a humane way. Now, with this new clause 2A, a person who, without reasonable excuse, I'm interested to know what a reasonable excuse might be also, but fails to comply with subsection 1, commits an offence and is liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding $900. I'm interested to know how that figure was come to, $900, when we hold ourselves to such high esteem with regard to our animal welfare and control of pests in a humane way. $900, not exceeding, so it could be $200, or why is there not a specific amount there, and why only $900 when we really should be wanting to, put people off doing things in an inhumane way?
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Indeed, it's not only $900, it's a tripling of the fine. So at the moment it is only $300 under legislation, and it's tripling to $900. It says up to, because you allow the courts, in the case of a court case, to make a determination as to what should be relevant, rather than saying it must be this, because there could well be, I can't think of any, but mitigating circumstances. And often in legislation we would say, unless there is reasonable cause or reason to do so, which means that it's not an absolute infringement or crime, and again it would be for a court to determine whether or not that was the case. I don't believe the legislation has gone through to say what would be or wouldn't be, and the reason that wouldn't make sense is people would say, well, I'm just going to go and do it this way because obviously this is justifiable. But it is a tripling of the fine, in effect showing the significance of the view of the House as to penalty, a tripling of the penalty as to what is previously in legislation. But secondly, it is always important when looking at what a penalty would be that we'll line it up with similar sorts of effects elsewhere where somebody may be committing a crime, so that there is some degree of uniformity in penalty across statute books.
Thank you. Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I was around, but I can't recall all the details of the Animal Welfare Act 1999. It was a piece of legislation heralded through by Pete Hodson, actually, who was a vet, and it was very progressive. But there are amendments here, of course, that are being proposed, and one is to section 43, consideration of application, and I'm guessing that's an application for an export licence. And it says here that, quote, the proposal is that any history of breaches by the applicant of conditions on an animal welfare export certificate. It's a very useful time to ask questions of the Minister as to what's he doing with the live export situation. And I'm guessing that the changes here relate to the possible reintroduction that our previous government banned, and I'm assuming that this may relate to new legislation he has in the pipeline. If so, when are we likely to see that? Because there are different exports of live animals. There are some chicks, there are some goats. Most of those are flown. We have banned cattle going on ships. So does this relate to the so-called reintroduction of live exports of cattle on ships that the government's talked of? We haven't heard too much about, and I think is absolutely stupid. But the government may be wishing to proceed in that area. And does this provision here mean that those exporters, where there have been breaches of standards, and there has been a process, and the Minister can maybe clarify, a process of reporting back from live exports leading up to the ban. There were reports that were supposed to come in. I think MPI probably weren't as good as they should have been at getting those reports. But where there were identified breaches in any way or bringing the animals to consolidation prior to export, does this change here, does this mean that those are the very people who may be eliminated from receiving a live export certificate?
Well, Madam Chair, no, I mean the member is trying to make a link between two parliamentary terms. This proposal, or the amendment in Clause 64, Section 43, was in the proposed legislation during the first reading when he was Minister, and so it actually has come across that period of time and it remains there. Indeed, Section 43 lists matters that the Director General of MPI must have regard to when considering an application for animal welfare export certificates, and the policy intent is that any breach of conditions put on the previous certificate is considered as part of the assessment of a new application. So when the Honourable Damien O'Connor, as Minister of Agriculture, brought this legislation to the House in the last term of Parliament, this clause was there, and it merely says if there has been a breach, it is considered when somebody puts in an application for a new certificate. I mean, I would just point out, to take issue with one thing he said. He said the previous government banned live animal exports. They didn't. Live animal exports still take place under the legislation they put in place. They narrowed or restricted a certain part of exports when it comes to ships.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to speak to 65 under Part 4 on the amended Section 81 amended effect of this part. It's to do with research, testing or teaching in use of animals, and relates to the welfare impacts of that. There is a challenging history in terms of how vivisection has been used, and perhaps many of us know the sort of worst examples of it, where cosmetics are rubbed into rabbits' eyes, and over a course of time people see whether shampoo is, harming the rabbits day on day, and it's pretty grisly and fundamentally cruel for the animals. This is to do with how animals are treated in terms of application of testing and research. And what I wanted to clarify from the Minister is how this change affects the overall approach that we take and the limitations imposed by subsection 1 on the application of parts 1 and 2, and the regulations made under this Act do not apply in a case where an animal is used in research, testing or teaching other than in accordance with this part, or other than in accordance with the conditions of any project approval, or if regulations prohibit an activity or a procedure from being undertaken in the course of research, testing or teaching. I wonder if the Minister can explain the impact of this change on the current framework and the parameters around that issue.
Madam Chair, both in legislation and regulation, I think it's fair to say there is some confusion. It may not be broad or wide, but it is not as clear as it needs to be about what is permissible and what is not within New Zealand regulation when it comes to teaching, testing or research on live animals. This merely clarifies that. It sets out very clearly what is permissible, but equally what practices are not. I would note for the member that any research, teaching or testing activity requires approval of an animal ethics committee before it can take place. That doesn't alter it. So the amendment merely clarifies so that there is no confusion under legislation or regulation what is already the view of Parliament is what's permissible and what is prohibited under law, but the role of an ethics committee as to deciding what should take place remains.
Honourable Rachel Brookett.
On this point, I was looking at the Principal Act as well, and that it is just really B that is changed in a reference to regulations in subsection 2, which I think the Minister just referred to. So the most of the clauses already in the Principal Act But the change here relates to regulations, and are there other changes, or is the Minister considering that there will be new regulations, or that this just refers to the existing regulations, if there are any, and that this is just the clarification around the regulations applying?
Yeah. Madam Chair, this area of law regulation is not something I have responsibility for. I've delegated it. However, no, we don't expect there to be new regulations. It merely is in respect of existing legislation.
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I go to 64A3, Section 71 is amended. It's public notification, and it relates to actually one of probably the most important parts of our animal welfare system, and that is the independence of NAWAC, the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. And it develops codes. It's still working through these codes, and they are quite complex, and I think are respected for their independence, and I think any minister would be somewhat foolish to step away from that independence and trying to have more input into that. And there has been at times a frustration around the process, and this amendment here will limit the submission period to 30 days, as I read it. So no earlier, which means must be date no earlier than 30 working days after the date on which the public notice is given. Now maybe I'm, if the Minister can clarify that date around the submission process and ensure that, I guess it might be an attempt to kind of speed up the process, but actually these are really, really complex issues, and so I seek clarification of the notification submission period for NAWAC and its draft codes.
Honourable Todd McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, already existing is in legislation no less than 30 days. What this clause does is changes notification. So at the moment it says notification through publication in a newspaper, no less than 30 days after that. This is merely saying public publication, so it doesn't have to be a newspaper. It can be in a range of ways to inform the public. The period of time, which is a minimum period of consultation of 30 days, is not being altered.
The question is that Part 4 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to the debate on Part 5, which is on clauses 80 to 123, amendments to Biosecurity Act 1993 and regulations, and Schedule 3 and Part 3 of Schedule 4. The question is that Part 5 stand part. Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Madam Chair, KPMG put out an agri agenda every year, have done for, must be getting close to 10 years, and I think for pretty much the vast majority, if not every one of those years, biosecurity has been acknowledged as the number one concern for agribusiness leaders across our country. So we tread cautiously in this area of biosecurity, both legislation and regulations. And I know that there were some, again, amendments that were brought to the committee by the Minister at the last minute. I'm trying to work my way through them here, what they were. Indeed, it's probably less significant. I think the Select Committee's probably looked at them thoroughly. But just questions to the Minister as to whether he considers that this change here, this opportunity that we have, indeed is making the adjustments that we need to continue to upgrade our biosecurity systems to meet the ever-increasing threats to our borders. And people say, why is that? Well, we do have more imports and more exports, so there's more products coming into our country, but indeed climate change is shifting the risk profiles. And so our ability to inspect, our ability to seize, as are some of the provisions in this piece of legislation here, the ability for people to intervene and the right people is critical. So just firstly, a basic question to the Minister: has he considered he's had the best advice and that we're making all the changes given the opportunity in front of us?
Madam Chair.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
Yes, I do believe I had the best advice. Indeed, I think MPI are an exceptional agency that always give us the very best of advice. But what I would say is the changes here are modest to moderate. They don't alter the Biosecurity Act significantly. They give more certainty to us in as far as the meaning of law in some cases. For instance, one example is, a clause in the Biosecurity Act clarifying the changes to time limits for compensation, so that we can see very clearly what needs to happen in the case of, there being an adverse effect, or around arrival of ships, notice of Crown's intention to arrive in New Zealand. So it's really, you should see it as an updating of provisions that actually make it easier for both those that engage with biosecurity from the outside, import or export, or equally biosecurity themselves to be able to do their job properly. I think, though, the point that Honourable David O'Connor was sort of moving towards is the importance of the security of our border and biosecurity. And ultimately, that comes at a cost both of time and of resource. There are occasions where New Zealand businesses in the primary sector are extremely frustrated by the rules we have in place around biosecurity. But for that, it is very important, because New Zealand is a country that produces, and the primary sector is such importance to our economy that we have to ensure that we have very modern systems and up-to-date systems to deal with the potential of an incursion. I think across government, our biosecurity officers have done an exceptional job. There are occasions when things happen and they deal with them very, very quickly, and we have largely been exempt from the problems of imported harm, not by luck, but because of how professional they are and how closely we work with the primary sector. But no, to give them the assurance the changes that are here are not to weaken, necessarily to strengthen, they are just to modernise and make it easier for us to do our job and give certainty on the side of those who from the private sector engage with biosecurity.
Honourable Joe Luxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to draw the Minister's attention to Section 130, amended the declaration of a restricted place. 3A states that the notice must be given by serving a copy on the occupier of each place included in the area of the restricted place, or by delivering a copy of the notice to the occupier in accordance with Section 164A1, which also includes delivery by email or fax to the person. I would like to know what happens if there's some email sent, fax or postal, but the person, the occupier I should say, denies ever having received this notice. What is in place to follow up to ensure actions are taken to make sure that the occupier of each place receives a copy of the notice? Is there a declaration or something that they need to sign or fill out to say that yes, they've received it and they adhere to whatever is in place in that notice? That would be just good to know, because some people get a bit afraid of what notices and things might mean for them, so they may try to avoid them, I guess, but I'd be interested to know what the Minister has to say about that.
Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I go through to, again, on the basis of the importance, there are many questions here, and generally, as uneasy as it is for me, going through this piece of legislation, I actually have to agree with the vast majority of it. It is very, very good, and I can see why some of these adjustments have been made, but there's one here around notice of a craft's intended arrival in New Zealand, and it kind of improves, I guess, the requirement for, and it will be a lot of yacht owners, it probably won't be the big cargo and container vessels, I'm guessing, but people who are coming to this country in yachts, and there'll maybe more of them as we see disruption around the rest of the world wanting to come down here, but there are requirements there that a change of port, they say they're coming into Whangarei and then they have to go down to around to Gisborne or something, but what I can't read in there are obligations clearly to notify the Director General. It doesn't necessarily say how. We assume, is that able to be done electronically, or are there other systems? Because if any Kiwi tries to ring a government agency, you get an 0800 number, And if you're out on a yacht and you've got limited communication, given that this is a bill dealing with technical issues, the question of the Minister is how do people on yachts notify the Director General of a change of port when they come in? And people might think it's a kind of frivolous thing. Actually, the potential risk with these yachts is huge to our biological agricultural systems. So it is important we get it right, and when we've placed these obligations on the master of the craft, making sure that is possible to ensure biosecurity officers are in the right location to meet that vessel is absolutely critical. And in fact, I still find it somewhat astounding that we can have vessels come in and park up and wait for a day or two until a biosecurity officer might clear them, given the risks there might be in the sails, in the cargo that might be on deck or whatever. So perhaps the Minister can answer, just the process. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll deal with Amy O'Connor first and then with Joe Luxon. Indeed, the Director General will be able to decide themselves how best that should take place, the notification. So we leave that to the Director General to make sure that it's practical rather than having the legislation. In this case, though, it only applies where a ship or a vessel, a yacht as an example, has already entered New Zealand's territory, but it is impractical or impossible to go to the port that they have notified, and therefore the Director General will be able to set out how, under that limited circumstance, they should inform him, although it's the agency rather than the Director General sitting there waiting for the notification, so that we can ensure that, one, there is not undue risk to perhaps that yacht coming to New Zealand, but there is not undue risk or greater risk to biosecurity in the country. In as far as Joe Luxon's questions around Clause 105 or Section 130, this merely, so again, this is a clarification of law. It merely says that every practical step should be taken to inform somebody. It can be in person, it can be by facsimile again, it can be by email, but in the case that that has not worked, it is also reasonable that where a letter is sent and that the authorities deem the letter has been delivered or has a likelihood of being delivered, they can then take action. And the reason for this would be if there is concern about biosecurity and we are not sure that we have been able to provide the advice notice to the person we need to because we want to put a restriction in place, then what action should be taken. So it is in the case that, one example is a letter has been sent and it is reasonable to believe that the letter has been delivered, whether it is opened or not is secondary, but this would be only used in the case where other more traditional means to ensure somebody is notified have not proven to be successful.
Honourable Rachel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm interested and want to note that how great it is that we are all in agreement about how important biosecurity is. But just noting at Clause 119, there's a new 166B inserted, which is making instruments that make minor amendments or correct minor or technical areas. And I was hoping the Minister could comment on the need for this new clause, if it's, it does seem to be an insertion, if it's a change from, if there's a need for new instruments or if it is a rewording. And then also, when I first glanced at it, I of course was thinking of biosecurity and the word instrument. I was imagining something that would be in the water sampling for some biosecurity risk. And then, so my question is whether or not in the Biosecurity Act itself or somewhere else that instrument is defined, so people will know that in fact we are talking about a legislative instrument rather than a scientific instrument.
Madam Chair, no, certainly not a scientific instrument. This is, should be viewed just as a cost-cutting amendment to allow delegated legislation to be amended without triggering a full statutory process of consultation and decision-making if the amendment would be no more than minor or to correct a minor error or technical error. So it means that we don't have to go to full consultation to change something that is very easy to do, but anything of significance, of course, this wouldn't be applicable. Vote.
Oh, sorry, if there's another question, I have to report progress now. So it is time to report progress.
The House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the Dispute Tribunal Amendment Bill and reports it without amendment. The committee has also considered the Regulatory Systems Primary Industries Amendment Bill and reports that it has made progress on the bill. Madam Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill is set down for third reading next sitting day. The Regulatory Systems Primary Industries Amendment Bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. today. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I just need to read again. The Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill is set down for third reading next sitting day with amendment. Thank you. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. today.